This joint special meeting of the Township Council and the Hamilton Street Advisory Board is called to order. In accordance
with the Open Public Meeting Act of the State of New Jersey, adequate notice of the March 11, 2019 joint special meeting of the Township Council and the Hamilton Street Advisory Board was provided as required by law.
Please all stand, salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Madam Clerk, please do the roll call.
Councilman Chase? Here. Councilwoman Francois?
Here.
Councilman Galtieri? Here. Mayor Kramer? Here. Councilman Onijaka? Here. Councilman Prasad? Here. Councilwoman Pruitt?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Vassanella?
Here.
Councilman Wright?
Angela Barrett. Patrick Giannato. Here. Benjamin Guy. Here. Geneva Hall. Here. Tim Kelly.
Here.
John Ioka. Remy. Vincent Pesci.
Okay, thank you. That second group was called.
Did you call John Okoye?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Deputy Mayor, before we start, I'd like to just give a little brief introduction as to why we're here this evening. For about 2 decades, Hamilton Street has had mixed use zoning. In other words, where you can have retail, commercial on the bottom floor, and on the above floors, you can have, so about 5 years ago, the Township Council took over the Special Improvement District and created a Hamilton Street Advisory Board to advise them on that. Subsequent to that, we did a SWOT analysis, which is a strength and weakness analysis that determines what was good and what was bad about the street, things that need to be improved, things that were good. And one of the glaring weaknesses was, and it was shown by the fact that there hadn't been any new development on the street for a good 20 years, was that the zoning, while it allowed mixed use with commercial and residential on the upper floors, nothing had been done. So through a series of meetings that the Hamilton Advisory Board, the Planning, and the Council, we tweaked the zoning ordinance to allow from 2.5 stories to 3, and if you had a certain amount of land, about 40,000 square feet, you could go to 4. As you could see from the street right now, we have several small developments and 3 large developments as a result of that, starting that process in 5 years ago. After that, we hired the firm that's going to give us a presentation tonight to do an economic development plan on 2 areas of town, one being Hamilton Street. They then gave us some additional recommendations, one of them breaking the street into 3 different areas, basically 3 same-size areas with the closest 1/3 to New Brunswick, allowing to have no commercial on the bottom floor, and the possibility of some bonus densities, for instance, maybe going up to an additional story. The important thing is that from 5 years ago, this board, the Township Council, the Planning Board, has taken a very steady, slow approach to changing the zoning. Specifically, what we're here to talk about tonight is a specific property that we've asked the consultants to take a look at that wants to have student housing. And we asked them to look at a couple things, the most important being the parking need. Because there is no stated parking need or parking standard, we need to know what the appropriate parking is so that we don't have overflow. Number 2, we wanted to look at the economic impacts. It's very important to note, once again, that we're talking just about one specific area of town. We're not talking about going to 5 stories for every other type of development or 5 stories for the rest of the town. It's also very important to note that, as you can see, the council and this board and the planning board made a very concerted effort to make economic development and the betterment of the township, specifically Hamilton, at the forefront of the discussions. And I think you can see from what's being done We want to keep that at the forefront, which is why we have the three professionals that we have tonight. And Mr. Deputy Mayor, I will introduce them, give them a brief bio so everyone understands the extent of the professional people that we hired. We hired Forward Planning, Todd Poole, which will introduce his other two gentlemen in the corner. He's the president, founder, and the principal of Forward Planning. He has over 26 years of economic and community development experience, both in the private and the public sector. He has all type of experience in local, regional, national experience in real estate, land use, comprehensive master plan, etc. He holds a master's degree of public administration, a focus in finance, a BA in public administration and economics from Rutgers. He's certified as an economic development professional by the National Development Council, and he's a member of the American Planning Association, a past member of the Urban Land Institute. Part of his development team is Mr. Jim Zullo. He's a vice president of the Timothy Haas and Associates and director of the firm's New Jersey office. He specializes in the area of planning, engineering, architecture, and that specializes in parking. He serves as a firm's leader for transit-oriented development and provides consulting services for various downtown parking operations throughout the Northeast. He also served as the executive director of Elijah's Promise, senior director of real estate and economic development of New Jersey Transit, and vice president of the New Brunswick Development Corporation. He received his BA from Tulane University and a master's in city and regional planning from the Brownstein School. He's a certified planner and a certified administrator of public parking. The third individual who will be speaking tonight is Mr. Glenn Patterson. He's a principal of GP Planning. He's a former director of planning and development for the city of New Brunswick, our neighbor, which is very important because he understands the issues that come in this area. In that role, he was involved in the development of many mixed-use developments like we're talking about tonight, and projects that included student housing that we're talking tonight. He has a master's degree in city and regional planning from Rutgers University and is a licensed professional planner. With that, Mr. Poole, if you'd be kind enough to come up and start the presentation. You can use.
It might be better to use
pick one of the mics.
microphone.
Yeah, either one.
And just so, Vince, just so the audience knows, if you haven't seen the agenda, there will be time, and we'll allow as much as we can for public discussion, public input, questions, concerns, etc. So we'll absorb what the presentation is, and then we'll get into a lively discussion over it. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Poole.
Great. Good evening, Madam Deputy Mayor, members of the board, members of the audience. Thank you very much. My name is Todd Poole with the firm Forward Planning, as Vince mentioned. We are the principal consultants that have been working on this assignment. Some of you may have seen the presentation that we had provided several months ago on the economic development strategy for Hamilton Street. And really, it's kind of led us to this point where, you know, we didn't have anything to do with the development that is you know, kind of subject to what we're going to be talking about tonight, but certainly we've, I think, identified all of the opportunities that can come to fruition on Hamilton Street. And as Vince mentioned, one of the things that we need to understand is how is parking going to impact Hamilton Street? Also, what are the economic impacts associated with development generally? Tonight's presentation, which actually I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking other than to introduce my colleagues, is really about the parking piece, the economic impacts and the fiscal impacts associated with the development that is being proposed and may happen over time will actually make its way into the final report that we will deliver to the township. Tonight is really to discuss some parking recommendations and how those we arrived at those recommendations. And for that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Jim Zullo, who will kick it off, and then he will pass it on to Glenn Patterson. All right, thank you.
I guess I got to speak through this, right? Well, thank you for having us here tonight. With me as well, I work for a company, Tim Haas. We're a parking consulting firm. We kind of work throughout the Northeast. I have very local roots. I was the director of the Parking Authority in New Brunswick. I know Hamilton Street, know it well. So very, very excited to have the opportunity to work on this project and see, kind of the wonderful change that's taking place. That said, and let me display my lack of technology capability here. Where's the event? It's on my computer. There we go. All right. So that said, parking is a very, very critical component to any project. And let me just start with, and sorry for so much type being small, but it's part of the report. I've worked, throughout New Jersey, and we all were just recently at a conference, New Jersey Future, on Friday. And what we are seeing and have seen for at least the last 10 years is a change in the way we plan our communities. Specifically about parking, in a lot of suburban communities like Franklin Township have been based for parking on what's called the residential site improvement standards, which are a very suburban type of parking requirement where they're built for much more suburban communities. So when a lot of downtown developments take in place, there often needs to be a variance because the parking requirements are often way too robust for the type of parking. So we got engaged to take a look at this project, 513 Hamilton Street specifically. And what we wanted to do for that is try to identify, working with the community here, what is the right amount of parking required for the project. And I'll tell you why you want it to be right size. That's kind of a term, why you want a right size parking versus build too much of it, and I'll go into that. So when we talk about this project, we wanted to meet with the project team, which we did, the locals, about understanding the nuances of it, and I'll get into that. We specifically wanted to understand what are like projects in the area, what are their parking, not only what their requirements are, but what is their utilization, even more important. So as a result, we went out at night when residential parking tends to peak, and we counted cars a couple of nights. So we performed these surveys, and very importantly to this project, one is, the type of housing it's geared to, which is student, so I'll get into that a little bit. And then also, what are alternative transportation modes? We're also in a very unique time related to mobility and transportation with Uber, Lyft, bike share, scooters, everything that's hitting our communities and, in essence, reducing the demand for parking to some extent. There was also talk about potentially a bus shuttle coming, either funded by the developer or by Rutgers, but these are the things we'll talk about. And then ultimately, coming up with a recommendation, and we kind of did two recommendations. One, based on what our occupancy surveys resulted in, and two, if there was what we call a parking management plan put in place. And the last component, and I'm very happy to have Glenn Patterson on the team. Glenn recently retired, and he's one of the brightest guys I know, so I was happy to have him. I don't mean to embarrass you, Joe, but he really understands the implementation component of how to modify ordinances or that type of thing. So this is the project, and I apologize for the small type, but 170 units, 362 bedrooms, targeted to Rutgers University students, maybe young professionals, that type of thing. It's approximately 1.2 miles from Rutgers University College Ave campus, and it's about a 25-minute walk to the Rutgers campus or a 6-minute bike ride. These are just some of the details about the square footages. I'm not here to really speak about the type of units and things like that. That's not my area, but they typically seem to be smaller than a lot of apartments, again, geared towards students and that type of person. So now what they have proposed for the amount of units is approximately 0.75 or 0.74 per unit and 0.35 spaces per bedroom. And I'll get into that. It'll be different than what we recommend, but I just wanted to, that's kind of the baseline that we were first, as the consultant projected, this is what they were contemplating. So just, again, talking a little bit what exists, this is in the Hamilton Street corridor zone, and you all have already, through your council and your planning, adopted smarter parking requirements, specifically as it relates to your commercial uses. you recognize that because of the availability of on-street, that not all commercial parking has to be provided off-site. And so that was a very forward-thinking policy. And in the recommendations of the Hamilton Street Corridor Master Plan update in 2015, you specifically call out an opportunity for developers to reduce residential parking requirements on a case-by-case basis, obviously coming to the town and looking to see what you all think makes sense. So these are just things we talked about and to get a base understanding of what exists in this corridor. And again, just to outline, this corridor is intended, and I'm not to be higher density, mixed use, walkable, and again, you are like many other communities throughout the state, throughout the country, that want this type of development, not auto-dependent, and again, because of changes in demographics and population and the millennial, we've heard all too many times, this is where many communities are trying to plan for the future. So let me just speak briefly about why it is important to right-size parking. And first of all, parking is expensive. Surface parking, not even including the cost of the land, can be anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a space. Structured parking is $25,000 a space. So again, obviously as an economic feasibility to developers trying to do projects in your community, you don't want to require too much parking or that's money wasted. Just as importantly, parking takes up land, typically 325 square feet per space when you count in the stall, the aisles, everything else. And what does that do? That land, when it's surface parking, contributes kind of poor economic or environmental effects. Heat island effect, stormwater runoff, and what the, I'm not an expert in the DEP requirements, but they're coming more and more stringent. The more runoff, and they don't even, the less runoff is what they want. So these are the challenges, and these are the things you don't want to overbuild parking. On the other side, you don't want to underbuild parking because it has negative consequences. Certainly it forces residents to cruise around the neighborhoods looking for parking, and it can inundate nearby street parking, of adjacent neighborhoods. So obviously, again, not too much, but not too little. So let me just, I want to talk to you about why or how we look at establishing the appropriate parking requirements for a project. First of all, we're looking at the target market for the units. Obviously, if they're larger families, in this case, they're students. Again, we're also going to look at the existing vehicle ownership in the census tract here, and I'll show you that data. Is there availability of on-street parking? And again, you've already made some changes related to the use of on-street for commercial, but I can tell you when we were driving out counting cars at 10, 11 o'clock at night, most of the parking on Hamilton Street was wide open, can be shared. And for this project where you have residents, the resident peak hour parking is about 11, 12 o'clock, or 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So there, and that's another smart process about sharing parking. Not just building it for one use, not building it in a silo. You want to share it to the greatest extent possible. The other thing is accessibility of other modes of transportation. We looked at, what bus lines here, and down Hamilton Street, there aren't a lot of bus sites. Obviously, Rutgers does not at this time have any sort of, bus route up this way, that type of thing. And then, the availability of amenities within walking distance. So if you are, like in this area, trying to build a mixed use where you can walk to shop, where you can, you don't have to get in a car to go everywhere, you become less reliant on, single occupancy vehicles and and parking. Parking pricing is very important. And here it's a very unique case because you have to be careful. If you typically, a very strong policy to reduce the amount of parking is by pricing it, by charging people so that if I decide in my apartment I'm going to have a parking space, I'm paying additional for that. If you don't pay for it. However, you have to be careful in a community like this because people, to avoid the parking fee, may park off-site. So we have to have that balance. And in this case, because of that fact, we didn't consider charging for parking at this location because we did not want to drive people off the site to go look for parking elsewhere. And then walkability and bikeability of the area. So, that's it. So just quickly, this is in the track 532 in the census tract, and you may be, this is just some basic information about this census tract, but when we looked into it right now, it's basically one car per household is what is in this area presently today, actually as of 2017 through the data we looked up. The other thing that we looked at is density. Typically, denser multifamily projects have less parking peak demand because if you look at a 4-unit building or a 10-unit building, the likelihood is that everybody who lives there is more likely to be there at one time. When you start getting into the dozens and even hundreds of units, people are on vacation, people are at work. There's a much more ability to kind of share the parking amongst the users. So typically you won't require as much as a smaller project. Obviously, we talked about the student housing. We talked about the location in the Hamilton Street corridor. And we also look at project A's. Typically, in a garden apartment has a very high parking demand, and we'll come up to some of that. But I think the most important thing that we did is we surveyed as many projects as we felt were appropriate in the area. Now that was part of the challenge here. This is a unique housing type to Hamilton Street corridor. So I'll give you, the types of properties that we looked at before we get into that big chart were what's New Brunswick student housing. Now, I'm not going to stand there, would never tell you that that's comparable to Hamilton. New Brunswick students are, they're right there on campus, so they might likely have a lower parking requirement than you would have here. We looked at Highland Park, thinking about a couple projects there because there is probably close to this, and there's a lot of students that live in Highland Park that either drive to campus or walk to campus or bike to campus. So we thought that was fairly comparable. We looked at Lower Hamilton Street, where kind of on that border of New Brunswick, where there's a few projects that, again, are a little bit beyond the walking distance, still closer than the project. And the project you can see here is the red dot, and these are basically all the projects that we surveyed in the area. We also looked out here at some projects recently built, or I'll say within the last 5 or 6 years, multifamily, and those projects are affordable and they have a different dynamic related to car ownership. But we just wanted to see, use that as well, because some of the projects that are being built on Hamilton Street today aren't occupied, so we couldn't really survey them, except for one of the developer's projects right near, where I think it's a total of about 8 units. So it was kind of a small project. So this is all the data that we compiled, and again, it's very nuanced, and I'm not going to sit here and say what particular group of data has any more impact. But if you look at the New Brunswick stuff, the New Brunswick units, you come up with, and the one thing to understand is utilization is what's important. It's always, the parking requirements typically tend to be higher, but it's utilization. So here you see the utilization. You had 0.5 per bedroom. In the lower part of Hamilton, Somerset Street, where there's garden apartments, a couple recent student housing projects, you have 1.5 spaces per unit. Got all the data on how many units, how many bedrooms from each town, so we were pretty confident that's all accurate. Now this is a project right at the right where it's only total their utilization present 1.7 per unit, 0.58 per bedroom. Highland Park, you can see here 0.64. And multifamily in up that route 27 quarter 1.5 to 0.61. So that gives you kind of a good, summary of the ranges. Obviously, it's not that any one of these projects is specifically alike with the proposed development. So let me just go back over our recommendations related to this. And then, like I said, we're doing it in the two phases. One is if they just said, the developer just said, this is what we're doing, and we're not providing any alternative modes of transportation. We're not doing any of the things that I will talk about that are opportunities. So our recommendation, if they built it, would be to do 1.25 spaces per unit and 0.6 spaces per bedroom. We think based on it being geared to students, the density of the project, the occupancy results that we did, the census data of the area, even though it is, a different type of housing product, that we're comfortable with this recommendation. Now, we also feel that if, and like many other projects geared to student housing, there are opportunities to do things a little more innovative, a little more focused on mobility and not just on, the vehicle. Let me just go through these. First of all, it's a developer-sponsored car share program. Has anybody heard of Zipcar or car shares, where basically what happens is, unlike a rent-a-car, you can rent a car for an hour, you can rent it for 2 hours, 4 hours. They're in many communities throughout New Jersey. And basically what it does is it's about an $1,800 a month cost for a developer, or in some cases even a municipality, to put a shared car on this site, on Hamilton Street, wherever people download the app, they can reserve it, use it to go to the grocery store, use it to go, their trips. Typically, if you go beyond a few hours, it gets a little bit cost prohibitive, so it's really geared towards shorter trips to alleviate the need, maybe not for just a car, but at least that second vehicle. We all know households where we have a second car. And remember, to own a car, to insure it, to pay the gas, it's probably about $9,000 a year. So when you take that cost and you can save having at least one car in a household, that's more money than go towards rent, mortgage, that type of thing. So a car share on site is one opportunity. The implementation of a bike share program. If you hear about bike share, sometimes they're community-based, but many developers will buy bikes. They'll allow their residents to use them. They have to just take them and return them to the same spot so that the tenant doesn't have to worry about putting it in their apartment or where are they going to store it, all that type of thing. The other thing is a sponsoring of an Uber or Lyft ride-hailing program. There's been student housing projects where they will give, if you don't bring a car to the site, they'll say, we'll give you $50, $75 a month and an Uber subsidy. So all the user has to do is produce their receipts, and they can get that, because if we all know today, and you have children and young adults, Uber and Lyft is very popular for a variety of trips. So for, in this case, maybe students getting down to Rutgers campus, they could share a car. And even in places like Summit, New Jersey, they've subsidized Uber riders for transit people living in the town. So they don't come downtown and park. They keep their car at home, and they take an Uber and get an Uber back, and the town helps subsidize it. In this case, obviously, we're not suggesting the town subsidize, but maybe the developer. So the other important thing, too, I think, to understand is that a contingency plan. I may not be right. I don't know that I've always been right, but we're very confident. But one of the things we see in good urban planning and good planning in this area is, can the developer say, look, we're very confident, and us as the consultant saying, we're confident in this number, but what if? What if something changes? What if something's different? Can the developer secure a piece of land within 500 feet or so, which is a close proximity walking, that they can provide additional spaces? And this could be either in a rental capacity where they lease space from someone who has excess capacity. You look at the dollar store there in Hamilton Corridor or other retailers, they may have a lot of extra space, and it's a waste to have that space. Secondly, can they maybe purchase a piece of property and have that available or even convert it into parking if need be. So if they were to undertake basically a scenario of a variety of these options, then this would obviously be subject to the approval of the approving board, whoever that may be. We're confident, we believe they could reduce their ratio even a little more, down to about 1 space per unit and 0.5 spaces per total bedroom. So these are just the, the numbers, the differential. I think, so this is just a summary. Basically what was proposed initially from the developers, a total of 127 spaces. If they did not implement any sort of parking management plan, we would recommend those ratios, which total 215 parking spaces. And if they implemented the parking management plan, we would reduce it a bit from that to 172. So that's the quick summary. Now, what we wanted to talk about and why Glenn Patterson is here is to talk about what's the best way if the town is going to make modifications to its, to these parking requirements, and, what is the best way to implement that so that it protects the community, and it's the best opportunity to the community. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Zullo. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Jim and his team asked me to talk about how to implement some of the ideas that he's just been speaking about. The traditional way that you would do this is to adopt an ordinance which sets a number of standards, and then the developer comes in, and if he meets those standards, essentially he has a right to build if he is meeting those. Because this is a relatively unique project, it's not something that is typical for what you already have in the Hamilton Street area. It's different than what is over in the New Brunswick area. But one thing that Franklin may want to consider is, instead of immediately adopting an ordinance, is to consider looking at some of these projects and approving them via a parking variance rather than an as-of-right at the very beginning. One, it's easier and quicker to do that. You don't have to go through the whole ordinance adoption process, which takes time and stalls the development. And as I understand, the community would like to see this additional development happening here. You've been looking at this for a long time. This also allows the developer and the town's professionals, your engineer, your planner, your fire officials, and so forth, to sit down and negotiate out what would be the best strategies to work for this particular project. Mr. Zullo and I basically looking at this one project here at 513 Hamilton Street, but there's a potential that other projects may come in down the road. But you'll be able to take a look at this specific project and determine for a project of this size, this particular location, which of these other mitigation strategies that Jim just went through, which might work best at this particular location as opposed to something that might be farther up Hamilton Street, maybe up by Franklin Boulevard and so forth. And if you use the variance strategy and you come up with this mitigation plan, you're not setting a precedent for something that comes down the road later. When a planning board or zoning board gives a variance, it does not create a precedent for any subsequent project. On the other hand, if you have an ordinance in place, any developer that comes in and makes an application is subject to whatever those standards are. This Hamilton Street location is unique, as I just said before, Mr. Zullo has talked about. This project is being marketed primarily towards a student-oriented population. That may not be everyone in the development would be a student, but that's the primary target for it. But this is a location that's not immediately on the Rutgers campus. It's a bit of ways from it. It's not immediately served by the Rutgers bus system and some of the other ways that the students typically get around. The parking regulations in this neighborhood are very different than the parking regulations in New Brunswick. In New Brunswick, where I was the director for 28 years, There is resident permit parking. There's a lot of places that have meters on the street. There are time regulations when you can park on the street and so forth. That doesn't exist out here. So that's one of the things you have to account for out here, is that it's difficult to regulate someone who may be living here but may want to try to find a spot that is off-site. So you need to balance that out.
A microphone, Mr. Zullo, please.
Just very important that you can then monitor the performance of the mitigations. So you get the ability to really see what has resulted, what is the actual utilization, and that can help inform future applications.
Yeah, that's where I was going with this. But before you adopt an ordinance, you'd be able to get some real-world data to see what works and what doesn't work. And if some of the suggestions that we've put forward here tonight as mitigations turn out to be things that don't work as well as expected, you can fail quickly. That's a good thing to have, is that if it's not working, you can get out of it quickly, whereas if you have an ordinance in place, it takes a longer time to extract yourself from that. And the courts in New Jersey in the last few years have passed a rule that says that an applicant, when they make their application for a development project, they submit their site plan, that if that's a complete application, that the rules at that time are what govern. And as I'm sure you all know, trying to amend and change an ordinance takes some time. You don't want to have developers who may come in under a strategy that the community has found, well, we thought this was going to work, but it's not working as well as we want to change it. If someone tries to beat the clock and get in under the line, their application can be heard under those older standards. Whereas if you're using the variance route, you can get some better real-world data to see what works, what doesn't work. Nothing's guaranteed. These are all probabilities. There is no guarantee of success that all these things work. But if you do the variance, and we're just suggesting this, not saying this is definitely the way to go, but it does give you a better chance to see what works, what doesn't work before you make a more long-term commitment. So that's.
I think that's it. I don't know, Todd, if we are available for questions or comments.
Great. Thank you, Jim and Glenn. Before we get to questions on the parking, because I know that's going to be the principal item that people want to talk about, I mentioned to you that we did perform an economic impact analysis on the project. And just some quick numbers, the approximate 362 students who would show up at this project based on average spending. And we contacted Rutgers and we looked at their data. Average spending among undergrads, graduate students, professional students, which we took as a weighted average or just a general average to figure out what students at this facility might spend, is about $8,200 per year. And that covers books and eating out and other sundries, going to the local convenience store and that kind of thing. What we did, and we did an economic impact analysis, which I'm not going to get into the technicalities of it. It's kind of input-output. It's basically you put a dollar in, and you watch how that dollar ripples through a particular geography. Well, the geography that we selected was the 2 zip code area for your municipality. All right, and so we narrowed it down to that to say, if these students basically occupy this building, and we know that they spend approximately $8,200 a year, we took roughly a little under half of that, about 45%, and said 45% of that $8,200 is likely to be spent somewhere locally. Most of it on food, right? Remember back when you were in school, most of your dollars, discretionary dollars, which almost all of them are, were spent eating and going to convenience stores and that kind of thing. So we looked at that, and as a result, the direct economic impact, and that includes labor, income produced, economic value, and output, represents $1.3 million in 1 year once all those students are here. Combined, And combined means indirect, and induce means if I spend $1, I'm helping to support a job, and that person goes out and because they have a job, they go out to the grocery store, to the movies, they're spending, that dollar is rippling further through the economy. So beyond the 1.3 million direct impact is 1.7 million in total impact for 1 year. Over a 10-year period, we calculated that the total direct impact would be about about $6.2 million going out over time, just in Franklin Township. Okay, so it's significant. The other thing that I would add is that there is an opportunity here to go from 4 stories to 5 stories. And some people might say, wow, why do you need to go to 5 stories? Isn't that kind of high? Well, and as my colleagues can also attest, and certainly, you look around the state, when you're developing these type of urban projects, density matters for a variety of reasons, not least of which is to make the project financially feasible for the development to take place. Right? At a certain point, in order for that developer to make the numbers work, or as we say in real estate game, make it pencil out, there has to be enough density on the site so the economics of building the project based on the rents that developer can get provides for a appropriate risk-adjusted return. With that said, sometimes you need to go above a certain level that you might have already authorized. In this case, going from a 4-story height level to a 5-story height level. But I will tell you that going to that 5-story height level, you do not cause an undue burden fiscally to the municipality. In other words, you're not going to be realizing greater levels of service for fire, police, or sanitation, or any of those things. And particularly because they're Rutgers students, we're not talking about families moving into this particular facility and burdening the system in that manner, right? So with that additional floor, of course, you're able to get those number of students who have that ripple effect. They're going to support local businesses and local jobs, so that's an important thing. So with that, I will open it up to questions for any of the 3 of us, and I don't know how you want to conduct this, or maybe I should just turn it over.
Okay, yeah, we're going to open up for questions, and I just want to see if council feels that we should have the public speak. Everyone wants to speak first, and before the council responds, council and Hamilton people have a commentary if we want to let the experts and the planner answer some of the questions.
Whatever your pleasure is.
Okay, but first, if we could, since the agenda calls for it, could we please have the open portion of public comment first? Okay, anybody coming up to speak? We often allow 5 minutes of regular council meeting and 2 minutes at a special meeting such as this, but since a lot of people have been waiting so long, I'm going to ask if any of my council colleagues don't have an issue with it, if we can extend it to at least 3 minutes so that people of the public will have a reasonable amount of time. And when you come up to the microphone, please state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes, and if you want, we can answer as we go, but it would probably be best for you to use your 3 minutes. Excuse me. We're going to run this from here. If you... Okay. So anyway, so if any council or Hamilton board members have anything to add to that,
No, I think we should
including
hear from
Mr.
the
Addy, please, but that's what I would like, how I would like to proceed.
Let's open it up to the public.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to open it up to the public,
So
please?
moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Okay. We are open to the public.
My name is Geraldine Fudge, and I live at 35 Ray Street, which is 1 block over from Hamilton. And my concern about this project is basically, well, one of the main concerns is traffic. Traffic and safety is a big factor of Hamilton Street. I left the building on Friday to make a right turn between 4 and 5 onto Hamilton Street coming home. I had to sit and there was traffic, cars blocking, there were cars blocking on the street, and I could not see what was coming at me. And in addition to that, Home Street, which comes at the same direction, people are coming out there. So my question to to the board and everybody else, is what are you going to do to control that traffic hazard? People are also walking, kids are coming home from school. That's only one factor. The same thing happens coming out of John's parking lot. Now, I know we can't put a traffic light on every corner, but we have to do something about the safety of people coming out of Home Street trying to make right and left turns. You take your life in your hands. So that's a big concern. And with the development and construction of a new building going there, it's going to be additional traffic. So have you taken that in consideration?
Microphone, please.
Please have the microphone if anyone's going to answer.
Ma'am, our charge was not to look at the traffic circulation. It was just to focus on the parking specifically.
Well, addition to the parking that you are suggesting, people will be parking there, but there are also people parking already. So those people have priority. The people that you have are coming in. But what happens to the traffic, the additional traffic, for people coming in to visit those people and those of us who live in the area? How do we handle our safety?
Jerry, Ms. Fudge? I believe our manager,
Sure.
Bob Vornlacher.
So just a quick answer. Any application that goes in front of either the Board of Adjustment or the Planning Board, which depending on the route that is chosen for this particular project based on some of the discussion I've heard already this evening, it could go one of two ways. Would be required to file a traffic impact assessment that's done specifically related to this project that would take into account the anticipated trip generations that this development would create as it impacts Hamilton Street and the adjoining neighboring streets. That's just standard course of action for any application that goes in front of either one of the boards. So while these gentlemen were charged with something different, they were charged with looking specifically at how parking and this particular project would impact the neighborhood and its parking needs. Any traffic-related issues would be addressed through the traffic impact assessment that would be done on behalf of the developer to be presented and analyzed and reviewed by not only the Planning Board or Board of Adjustment, depending, as I said, depending on the application, but would also be analyzed and commented on by the Engineering Department, the Police Department, and sometimes I still get involved in those things, and the planner that when they review these projects. So while not to say that there would or wouldn't be a problem with traffic as it relates to this particular project, that would be the responsibility of the board that it was presented in front of to do that review of that impact assessment. That's the process.
Okay, since you made that statement,
Ms.
is
Fudge.
Hamilton Street considered a county road?
It is not
Ms. Fudge.
considered. It is a county road.
I'm sorry, I just have to keep it going because the clock went out a little while ago.
Yes, Hamilton Street is a county road, so anything that's done I'll answer quickly, Deputy Mayor.
Okay.
Anything done would also be reviewed by county engineering and the county planning board because any access along a county highway is also reviewed by the county boards.
And Jerry, we can continue the conversations after the meeting. I just have to stick to the 3 minutes for each speaker for now. Mr. Connell?
Good evening, Bill Connell, 25 Spring Street. A general statement to the board. It's hard to tell, in my opinion, what makes sense to do here and what to allow, what not to allow, because I don't really know how many more of these are coming down the pipeline. So I'm concerned that you set this precedent and you could potentially overwhelm the neighborhood, or it just all happens too fast, where you just don't know the net effect of what you're really doing. That concerns me. I don't have an answer. That concerns me. I look at that. So I don't know how much responsibility we should put on a single development to make it smaller, keep it the same size. I don't know, but it concerns me because this is 5 years. This is, it's a long time. Specifically, regarding parking, you made a wishy-washy statement that caught my attention. This whole plan is being presented as student housing. But in the middle of your presentation, you said, well, it's not going to be all student housing. So I don't know how you can judge all the parking if you don't know who the residents are. And or what the outcome is, which raises another question. The over 50 developments. There were several approved as over 50 developments, and then eventually the usage was changed. Okay, so instead of just being an over 50 development, it became a family residential. So the question is you're approving this or you're selling it as a student project, which has one context, but if it winds up being family or singles, okay, the whole car usage change, everything changes. So that's my question is how do you deal with that? What restrictions on the usage are you putting into it in the plan? And that's it. Thank you.
Well, Bill, I can answer that very quickly. And one of the things that will be talked about in the report and we talked about later is that we're going to come up with a definition of student housing. And that definition very well may be that, you know, the rooms can't be bigger than a certain size. They each have to have their own bedroom. There's going to be a common space, only one common kitchen. And as you know, we have some gentleman who's sitting there who's in New Brunswick, who worked in New Brunswick for 26 years, knows that when you build those type of units, you get student housing because that's what's going to be there. Now, will you get once in a while, you know, maybe some young professional who graduated a year or two who wants to be in with his friends who are going to school? Yes. But you're going to get the same type of usage and the same type of people. And we will have to do an ordinance to determine exactly what student housing is going to be so that we can control that. And Bill, the numbers, and I think you were saying they were wishy-washy because you can't control it, but when you have a definition of what student housing is, then the assumptions that they have made, which is based on us controlling that, are valid.
Right. And Vince, if I can also just add, I work on projects like these in different parts of the country. As a matter of fact, I'm working in College Township, Pennsylvania, which is where principally most of Penn State's assets are. I mean, State College is where the central campus is, but probably better than 80% of all of Penn State's assets, including a number of its off-campus housing, is in College Township, where we're working on a project right now. The type of housing that we're talking about is considered college-targeted housing. That is to say, it's not exclusive, but because of the way it's being developed, the size of the units, how it's designed, it is unlikely to be attractive to anybody but a college student. Again, there's no guarantee that somebody, you know, who's not a college student moves in, but just like, for example, today, there are above 55 communities that are no longer quote-unquote age restricted. They are age targeted, and they're age targeted for this reason. There was a glut of such housing built in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and because there was a glut, a lot of them went unfilled. And so developers had to turn around and say, well, can we make these age targeted, right, in order to fill up the ones that weren't filled? In this case, this is really about catering to a captive audience, in this case Rutgers University students, and it is designed that way. So I think there's a comfort level that principally the people that occupy this housing in this development will be college students.
And just want, for clarity, I just want to interject though, we are not saying that legally it has to be rented to students. It basically legally it can be rented to anybody. And if, say, Rutgers University or a private entity did a big build-out project on the border of New Brunswick between Lewis Street and this area here, the need and other areas could dwindle. And although I agree with everything you're saying about the need now, what is relevant and a need now, depending on the build-out in New Brunswick and other parts of the university, that could change. And in 5 or 10 years down the road, student housing may be a small portion of the finished product. Legally, it's not student housing. It's targeted towards students. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tibbs?
Yes, sir. Johnny's Tibbs, 25 Parkside. All due respect to gentlemen, Glenn Patterson and Dulo. I was Jimmy Cahill's campaign staff when he first became mayor a long time ago. To everybody here in the audience, and I've been living in that area for 75 years. I know every hole and corner in the 4th Ward in which this building is built. I am quite disappointed. I am quite disappointed that this building construction have gotten this far because none of the residents in the Fourth Ward knew anything about this building being built because they was never notified during the whole 2-3 years it's been in process. I haven't seen anything. Don't nobody know about this building except for a couple of us that come to council meetings and so forth. But the planning board and you gentlemen, consultant, you are guilty of gentrification, point blank. If you understood where this neighborhood, this building is being built, you built it right in the middle of a black neighborhood, right in the middle of the black neighborhood. So it had to be an evil intent for you to build that building there. In evil intent, whoever initiated that, the building of that building, have an evil intent of changing the voting platform within that construction area. That's why that building was built. That's what gentrification is. That's exactly what gentrification is. And it's also another fact that it's built there to change the neighborhood to a middle-class oriented neighborhood, the student building. That's why the building you built there, okay? Now, my biggest concern, even though it's building getting built, we have nowhere in the Fourth Ward. All of our citizens that graduated from college and so forth, they can't even come home to live. There is no apartment in the Fourth Ward in your area which you build the building for any of them to come back home. They can't even come back home. All your apartments is beyond their physical means. It's beyond the economic status of the families that live in the neighborhood. So I want you to understand that that's what this project, all the technical stuff that you guys have done and so forth, it's great. But you are guilty of gentrification of that neighborhood. Thank you.
Did you want to respond? Is there anyone?
Deputy Mayor, I just, one thing, for clarification purposes.
Yes, ma'am.
This particular discussion tonight is about something that hasn't even had an application to the planning board. I think that it's important that we clarify that this discussion about a potential development along Hamilton Street has not even reached the point of application to either the planning board or board of adjustment. It's not built, it's not approved, it's just a concept that is being discussed here tonight with the thought that it might result in an application in the future. But I think it's important.
The manager's absolutely correct.
To
So
clarify
I want to be
that.
clear, but on
This
the...
is not about any current building that's on Hamilton Street or one that's even
Yes.
been proposed to the planning board or board of adjustment.
And perhaps we'll have additional meetings and conversations. So there is nothing decided now, and nothing, I believe, that will be decided tonight on this particular project. Excuse me. Ms. McGovern.
Cecile McIver, 160 DeMont Lane. You mentioned a couple figures for parking spaces. 172 was one of them. If you get the 5 stories, how many parking spaces are you recommending?
The 5 stories is inclusive of the number of units and the number of students we're talking about. We're not talking about adding additional above the numbers we mentioned.
And are those parking spaces all on site? Is there underground parking?
Microphone, please. Microphone.
Right now, we're just proposing the requirements. We're not saying where they are. I know that the concept plan that we've seen has a good portion on the site, but again, we're just establishing the requirement, we're not engaged by the developer to say how they're built or where they're
concerned
built.
because the street is already very full, and a lot of people are parking in, for instance, John's parking lot.
Sure.
And if that gets developed, there are going to be even more people on the street.
Well,
so I've recommended in the past that parking be on site, for
Sure.
instance, in underground parking.
Yeah, and that is what the developers proposed. And again, what the developers initially contemplated, and again, as it was said, there has been no application. We've recommended based on our analysis, more than he suggested. And that would be on site.
That's good. Thank you.
Next.
Hi, Valeria Rodriguez, 10 North Dover Ave. So my question is around the variance strategy that was proposed, which I think is a good idea because it allows the township to try different methods. Now, would you agree that giving the current residents parking permits would be one of the options as part of the variance strategy?
You're talking about giving residents in that area
Existing residents.
correct. That is a strategy that to help ensure that the residents of this building or anyone else, that they don't impact the adjacent street, that only the residents on that street could get a residential permit program. But that does require then the adoption of a residential permit program.
Actually have one already.
And for clarity, Mr. Zullo, it would not require the creation of a parking authority if we went to resident parking permits? Thank you.
So actually, the township has a
Mr. Vornlocker, I just didn't want to take time. If you can wait until she finishes and then.
Okay.
Did you have
my follow-up question around that is, do we have enough staff to enforce the parking in the area? And then my second question is a little bit off topic, so I don't know if we allow him to finish.
Has anything to do with Hamilton about this?
Yes. So,
the business district, please.
If it's not the parking permit or any other variance strategy, how often could we expect that the strategy on the parking change? And if so, do we have to hire additional consulting to do the analysis each and every time? How does that impact the taxes on the current residents?
I guess they would be best to answer that, and Mr. Vornlocker would like to follow up with your other question.
To monitor how the parking doesn't necessarily have to be a consultant. It could be a city or planning. It could be a town staff person that goes out, counts vehicles on a periodic basis, whatever that may be. It could be once a quarter, once every half year, just to ensure to see what is the actual utilization. That's the only data that you need to acquire, really, to see how the program's performing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a consultant.
Mr. Vornlocker?
And just to further that, so the township certainly has, the township engineer is staffed by, right now, currently a consulting engineer, but Mr. Healy is a licensed planner that's the director of land use for the town, and there's a number of other staff members that are certainly capable of continuing that analysis. The other issue that you raised is resident parking. Resident parking currently exists in Franklin Township on several streets off Franklin Boulevard. It's by permit-only parking across the street from the Arbor's apartment complex. We've kind of gone full circle here as far as how we're having a problem with the sound system here. The Arbor's has 399 parking spaces, one for each apartment, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. That was the norm in the 1950s, and somehow we've gotten back to that in the 2010s here. The off-street parking issues that exist were one that years ago instituted paid parking for the apartments. You had to pay extra for rent, and as a kind of a rebellion, residents, the neighborhoods around it, and it caused issues with the neighbors, and we instituted permit parking only on a number of the side streets off Franklin Boulevard, and it's been effective, and it's created now, it solved the problem that existed. This is going back probably 10 or 12 years ago. But certainly it could be done in this neighborhood if that was deemed to be an issue.
Okay, and that's not at the cost of the current residents, right?
No, it was just that if you live there, you were issued a permit for on-street parking on your street.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, just one quick clarification so everyone understands. We were in the process of hiring the consultant, Forward Planning, to do an analysis for this type of development prior to us being approached by a developer to do a specific project. So they're not working for the developer, they're working for the township to come up with ideas and standards. We asked them to specifically look at this development because, as any consultant will tell you, if you're looking at a specific project, you can delve more into the issues and get more involved and understand. So we asked them to do this. They're working at the bequest of the township, the planning board, and the township council, not at the bequest or for the developer. And once again, we asked them to look at this specific one so we could look at specific problems, issues, pluses and minuses for this specific project.
Thank you. Okay, next.
I'm Bob Rake, 132 Douglas Avenue, Franklin Township. Good. Bill actually answered, you guys answered my question already with Bill, but one of the questions was, well, one of my concerns is, I put 2 kids through college, and I had them living in dorms. 2 to 3 kids in a dorm, and more than 1 car. And, here you said, like, you had 1 car per unit?
Microphone, please.
Recommend 1.25 per unit and 0.6 per bedroom.
Okay.
Which
so
is
how many cars that gives a unit? 1 or 2?
1.2, so 1.2 per unit.
1.5 cars?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's averaged out throughout the project.
So every 10 units, 12 cars is what the anticipated number of cars would be. And I think, and Jim can speak to this, but it's important to understand is the consulting experience and the due diligence performed on this project looked at other student housing in the area to see how many cars were actually parking there. So this isn't a number we pulled out of a hat.
Right.
This is based on actual, survey data that shows this is how many kids bring cars to a similar type of apartment complex.
Okay. All right. And the
Trends have been that students are bringing
Microphone, please.
fewer cars, that they're relying on more services like Uber and Lyft to get around and not having to worry about
yeah, that's
the
what
car
you're
being
counting
parked on the street.
Yeah, but
and-
it's been just my experience that
Yeah.
through 2 kids and 8 years of college, I seen the kids with 2 or 3 cars per unit. That's what they had. I know the kids. My other question was that the site distance law between the corners. Do you guys put that in your parking thing?
That's a traffic circulation issue.
That's a traffic thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's not calculated where you're parking.
No.
So
No, I mean, obviously there are state standards on.
Right. Right. Right, but do you calculate that in your parking? That's my question.
So if you're calculating on-street parking, you always eliminate 25 feet from an intersection opposite the stop sign and 50 feet from the intersection on the stop sign side.
Okay,
That's
great.
just
No,
standard.
yeah, I'm making sure
You don't count that in any calculation
Well,
for
in my
on-street
experience on
count.
Hamilton Street, that law is not enforced.
Well, I won't sit here and argue with you, although there's been a number of people who have complained over the years that it's been overly enforced, and this is a balancing act that exists for the police department, unfortunately, and enforcement for businesses and homeowners versus those who come to visit, and it's a delicate balance, trust me.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
And just for clarity, the number of parking spots that you're determining based on those percentages, they're all based on only expecting 1 person per bedroom? That's what I got when I did the math there. So
the way that this development is conceived, and again, we're talking about a development that we are not consulting for.
No, I understand.
Right,
I just want to confirm the numbers because I want to move on to the public.
Sure.
That you're suggesting that your numbers you're basing are going to be accurate and they're only based on 1 student for a bedroom in a fairly, large rent.
Right. So the model of this type of structure is 1 bed per unit. That's the way it's designed. Each unit has its own bathroom. If you're familiar with what's happened not only at Rutgers, but universities and colleges around the country, they become mini resorts. And I'm not being facetious, I'm being quite serious. These projects that are being built today is because that's what the consumer, in this case, the college student, wants and demands. The buildings that are being built and the building that's being proposed is, there's one unit, and that unit could be up to 3 bedrooms, each bedroom having its own bath, each bedroom having one bed.
I appreciate everything you're saying, but legally, you're allowed to put whatever the square footage requirements. Usually it's 2 students per bedroom. And I'm not saying that's what will happen here, but I just want to confirm for the sake of people that are very conscious of the numbers, because everybody's trying to make it fit. We want the developers to be happy, but a lot of us, our concern is as much or even more so for the residents to be, have the services and parking spaces they need. So I just want to clarify, it's one, you're expecting 1 student per bedroom?
Well, you know, I can only speak to the data we collected, and I understand the point, but when we looked at other projects through, you know, Highland Park, New Brunswick, Somerset, it was based on number of units and number of bedrooms. We have no information about how many people are in those units, just the number of bedrooms and number of units.
Thank you. Gentlemen?
I can give you a little background from just what's happened in New Brunswick. These student-oriented or targeted units there tend to be mostly 1 person per bedroom. That is the trend. Particularly some of the newer ones that are under construction now may have 4 bedrooms, but they only have 4 occupants. That is the trend. What you saw 15 years ago at Rutgers, where you got 3 people per bedroom, the students don't want to have anything to do with that now. They like their privacy.
Okay, so just move it along so the public can all have a chance to speak, sir.
My name is John Collier. I live at 149 Matilda Avenue. Question: where are you going to build your next project in Somerset? Because, I'm asked the question because I'm to understand that on the corner of Hamilton and Matilda Avenue, these homes in this area are being sold. Who's buying these homes and why?
I think Mr. Dominic would be more suited to answer that than myself.
I mean, we don't have another project proposed right now. People buy property all over Hamilton. As you can see, we have, 3 big new developments. This is another one. We would hope, because of the way that it's zoned, that we would get other types. I can't tell you who purchased those or what type of development. People come in all the time and ask us about the zoning, and we tell them what the current zoning is and what they can do depending on the size of the property. And then we wait for them to come to us and give us a development proposal.
In other words, we're not going to be surprised by a big one of these big things coming up?
Well, you can at any time come in. I'm Vince Dominic. You can come in, you can call me, and I can show you all the zoning ordinances, and I can tell you what can be built. If you have under 40,000 square feet of property, you can go 3 stories. If you have over 40,000 square feet, you can go 4 stories. And we have a certain percent of the property that you can build upon, which is called lot coverage, a certain that can be impervious, and you have to provide a certain amount of parking on the property. That goes to how big the buildings the 2 buildings that are further down the street are pretty much in conformance with zoning. They were not given parking variance. They were given maybe a slight little variance on impervious, but they're basically as per our zoning ordinances. Those are the type of other buildings you are going to get if someone came in right now, bought property, and did not ask for a variance.
What I'm speaking of is, this is a whole block. This is from Hamilton Street all the way back to Martin Street, and from Matilda Avenue back to where this new building is being built right now. And to me, the other building was a big surprise to us. We don't want to have another big surprise.
Well, I can tell you that and I understand you were surprised, but this is a process has been going on for 5 or 6 years over the course of many meetings, like a meeting like tonight. Now, we made a special effort to really go out and give flyers, and every single one of these developments is given a notice for everyone within 200 feet of the subject property. All of these things are public. They're all at planning board, the zoning board, the council, All of them are public, and you can always look at our website. You can take one of my cards, and you can call me, text me, email me at any time. If you want to know what the next project is, I'm more than happy to sit down with you or any other member of the public or anyone else to go over each project individually, or to tell you the type of projects that are being proposed. I can't always tell you specifically, because some of those may be in a certain process that they're private and I can't speak to them, but I can speak in generalities like we're talking tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope it's not one of the wait and sees. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Elisa Douglas. I live on Davis Avenue. As someone who has lived in this town for many years and who has worked in higher education for about 20.
A little closer to the microphone,
Speak in the
please.
microphone, Elisa, so we can all hear you. Hi.
Okay. My name is Elisa Douglas. I live on Davis Avenue. And as a person who's been a long-time resident and someone who's worked in higher education, including at Rutgers University, one thing I know about college students, they're social. They're not going to go in their room like this. What is the consideration for pedestrian safety, for driving safety, for drug issues, psychiatric issues that students may bring with them, opioid addictions, et cetera, et cetera? Are we going to be including support for this? Are we going to be making sure that our citizens and our students, because I care about the students too, see, it seems like this was all overlooked, that it's not realistic, that it seems to be like a situation where the money's great, but what about the support systems? What about our law enforcement? What's going to happen with that? Are we going to be paying taxes for our law enforcement to take care of Rutgers students when they have issues?
So, to be fair, the consultants here tonight were not asked or hired to delve into. No, and that's what I'm going to get to delve into those issues. So, I think the Hamilton board members and council members will have answers or more questions or their own concerns that they'll voice. I know I compiled a list of what I have seemed to be the biggest or the most often mentioned concerns, which include some, but you brought some new issues to the table, some of the issues you mentioned. So we'll address it. If the Vince or manager or any of the consultants would like to, that's fine, but they were not hired to delve into that. I just want to be fair to them.
It appears that was not addressed and that was not.
Well, I go back to the fact that there is no application yet. This is to talk about a concept that was brought forward to the Hamilton Street Advisory Board, and it was brought forth to our Economic Development Director, Mr. Dominack, and our consultant, Todd Poole, who's under contract with the township to provide economic development consulting, brought in two people to talk about the parking impacts that this building would have and the parking needs that this would have. All of those things, while like the deputy mayor said, very well may be valid.
But excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you're talking about parking. Part of parking is going to be pedestrian traffic as well. Am I correct?
Well, so there'll be a number of issues, and so pedestrian safety is one where there's sidewalks provided for on Hamilton Street, and there's crosswalks provided for, and all of those things. But again, that's not what the purpose of these gentlemen here today are. Here they're to talk about the parking demand for this type of development and how this particular development might fit in the Hamilton Street Business District and the parking needs that they predict there would be for this type of development. It's that as much.
I respect that, but I think it's just something that needs to be mentioned.
And that's why the deputy mayor said that he'd take a note of it, and it'll be discussed further. Again, I don't want to belabor it, but all of these points may be very, very valid. It's not the purpose of these gentlemen here today. That's all I'm trying to say.
Excuse me?
Yes, Councilwoman Francois.
Whenever you're finished, I want to say something.
Okay, and I'm going to pass it off to you in a moment. I just want to say, as much as it isn't, they didn't come here to do that, I do want to read that the first thing it says on this flyer is curious as to how the new Hamilton Street student housing will affect you, question mark. So I believe your concerns fall under that first line of this flyer. However, like the manager said, that's not their purpose, and their studies didn't deal with that. Councilwoman Francois.
Yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to say. We have people here that we want to hear from you. This is public discussion.
bring it.
That's a neighborhood. The Hamilton Street Business District is a neighborhood. We are revitalizing that neighborhood. So all the concerns that you all have while you're here, although they may not be specific to the parking needs for this one development, we want to hear from you. So please don't stifle yourself. Come up here and bring it up. That was a very valid concern. It's something we need to address, just like the concern about gentrification. We need to address that. The whole thing about parking utilization, we need to address that. The variances, what types of things we can offer for parking, we need to address that. All the traffic congestion, we need to address that. That's something that people that live in the neighborhood, they want to make sure they're not going to be displaced. They want to make sure they have the same quality of life, and we need to be concerned about whatever issues you have. So we thank you all for coming up here, and whoever else needs to come up and speak, by all means, feel free to address your concerns.
Thank you, Councilwoman Francois. And the only thing I'll add to it is not just keep the quality of life, but actually make for a better quality of life for the residents that are there by the revitalization efforts. Thank you, Miss.
Yes, Donna Drew May. I live on Lafayette Avenue. You kind of
As loud as possible, ma'am. I'm sorry, just so everyone could hear you.
Donna Drew May, Lafayette Avenue. I want to say the previous speakers, they kind of said everything, but you summarized what I had notes on my paper about. So, to the gentleman over here.
Speak up so everybody can hear you.
Thank
You have a soft voice.
A little nervous. To the gentleman, with respect, sir. You talked about the parking impact needs and you mentioned Arbor Homes. That's why I like to call them on Franklin Boulevard, near Belmore and whatnot. No complaint, but many of those, the residents, they park in the church parking lots after a certain time at night.
I agree. I mean, that's why we brought in for resident parking.
Sir, whatever you're saying, it's not working. I'm not complaining because to me it's like catching fish. I would love for them to come inside the church. Sometimes I put a bulletin on their front, on their windows. Not just my church. There's about 4 or 5 church up and down from First Baptist Antioch all the way down to Eastern Avenue, the Shiloh Church. But they definitely park in our parking lots and our side street at Eternal Life Christian Center. We're not complaining. Long as people are safety, and when we need to use our parking lot, we put up cones ahead of time so they are there. And it's not overflow residents, it's people who live there. As the previous speaker spoke about the traffic, I work in New Brunswick, so I come up, I take different shortcuts now to get home to Lafayette Avenue. I live not too far from Mimi's or the firehouse. And now I'm taking all these zigzag streets over by St. Peter, Mary and Paul, I think it is, just to come back around up near the firehouse. And I'm caught into traffic now with my other friends over the years. They live in Hillsborough, so we are all merging into a bottleneck, whether you're coming off of 287, whether you're coming from Holland Park, or whether you're coming from Hamilton Street or wherever. We are stressed. And as my sister here said, safety. I won't repeat everything because you got it there. Children walking to school, seniors trying to walk to get food. It's a mess. And you know what? If you ignore us, the same thing is going to happen on Elizabeth Avenue in time. When they dry up the land and everything in this area, they're going to move to, and they already moving to the next spot. Okay? Yeah, gentlemen, respectfully, do you all live here? Do you live in this neighborhood? I bet you live very comfortable, right? My neighbors, when I moved here, we had a lot of senior citizens. We live in a melting pot area. A lot of seniors. They were pushed out, not because they wanted to be pushed out. Some of them are still struggling. Their homes have been paid off many, 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 many years ago. But the taxes for these, and schools, you know, schools are important. I'm not going to go down that road, but you're stressing us. You're stressing my senior citizens, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, the rainbow, whatever. You're stressing them. I'm not mad at you. I'm just trying to get me out. I'm trying to get words out to get you to understand. You're stressing our police department. I know you said these are for college kids, but as history has proved itself, these college kids are going to move on. They're going to be opened up to whoever wants to live here. Unfortunately, some college kids, they damage places. Alcohol. Have you been down to the municipal court in New Brunswick to see the certain days that it's only zoned for Rutgers student? I love the kids. Don't get me wrong, the college kids. You know, we all got history or something or another. But you're not making a safe environment for people. You're not making a safe environment for the environment. You're not making a safe environment for even the animals. Deers come down, they're not even afraid of us with antlers, racks that sit as wide as my car almost. And you have to take a second thought to walk out your door or bargain with them to see who's going to move first. They eat out of the garbage cans on Hamilton Street during the day while people are walking up and down the sidewalks. Hold on a second. I'm going to go.
Miss, ma'am,
I'm going to go.
I'm sorry,
Where are you?
but you've
Okay.
already gone over. I just,
Let me just say one more. Care about us, panel.
30 seconds, please.
Care about us. Care about the seniors. Care about the children. Care about the police department. Care about the EMTs. Care about us. Do you all live in this area? No?
We all live in Franklin, and we're going to address your questions as soon as we get a chance. But please, we have other people.
I know some of you on the panel will take care of this, but what you're doing is not right, sirs.
Miss,
think about your grandmothers. Think about your grandfathers. Think about your children, your grandchildren.
Thank you.
Think about human beings and trust in Jesus. Whatever you do, trust in the Lord. Trust in Jesus.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor, if I could
Yes,
just...
and just sorry, I didn't hear the beeper, so if you got to keep me informed of the time. No, thank you for your comments, and we were hearing everything you're saying. We just have to keep it going. Yes, Mr. Pohl.
I just want to emphasize, because it's been said, and I'm going to say it personally, we have absolutely nothing to do with the development. We have no connection with the development. We are under contract with the township to look at parking. It so happens that a developer has conceived a building. We are looking at that building as a model. Simply that. We did not propose a development. We have no connection with the developer. The developer is not paying us. So please do not accuse us of trying to create a development here. Thank you.
Okay.
We're the developer.
Okay, next, please.
Hi, Matthew Zavatsky, 1935 Old Amwell Road. I happen to also be a realtor. I've gotten no less than 5 calls in the last month or so. I guess, I don't know how long the flyer's been out. People between Henry and Home, Hamilton and 27, asking everything from, will I have garbage in my yard? Does this increase my value? Does this decrease my value? 2 people with open lots, can I build a 6-unit building on I came down and asked, we're just outside the development zone. So a lot of questions in that respect. You mentioned that these units that are proposed, I know there's no proposal yet, but the units that are being suggested are 3-bedroom, 3-bath units, correct?
Yes.
That's what he mentioned. Has there been a base rent suggested?
It's not even at that point.
So your question of parking, because I today I showed 4 different investors in the 6th ward, which is everywhere everybody wants to be. And to Bill Connell's point, you put up a building that does not have rent control, and they get $1,000 a bedroom. The kids that'll pay that, every one of them is going to have a car. The ones that don't have the cars, the ones who are putting 3 kids in those bedrooms, who live along Lewis, and you know, in that 6th ward area, I'm in those houses every day. There's 3-4 kids in those bedrooms because they want to lessen the rent, and they don't have cars because they can't afford them. But if you're going to charge a rent that's going to be high in a nice building, you think, well, that's a great thing. Those kids are each going to have a car, and they're going to be damn nice cars where mom and dad are going to say, where are you parking it? I want protection for it. And you can be sure the police department will hear from all of those parents. The garbage is another thing. We'll talk about walking up and down in the 6th Ward. They have township employees who go along and cite people for debris. What's going to happen to the neighborhoods with that? That would be my other question. So,
Thank you. If anyone would like to address that, or we pick it up later. Okay. Now, I'm sure there's some other comments, questions. Anybody from the audience? Please, we want to hear your input, even if you think it's similar to a comment already made. You can't. You can have someone else go up there for you, but you can't technically go, Jerry. But we can all talk afterwards, of course.
Well,
Arnie?
I would just suggest that we
Yes.
allow Ms. Fudge to come up again, only because while she was asking questions, we spent probably 2/3 of the time.
Vince, I'm fine with that. I just know that.
No, I think just to be fair,
the board. I didn't want to do something that anybody would get upset with me and suggest I'm showing favoritism. I know Ms. Fudge very well, and I would be happy to have her come back up and speak again if there's no one that has any issue with it. Okay, so Jerry, as soon as Mr. Arnie. Arnie, you're there. Go ahead.
Okay. Arnold Schmidt, 134 Hickory Road, Somerset. I just came from another meeting, so I missed. I just came from another meeting, so I missed a lot of what was going on here. So I apologize if I'm repeating a question that I'm going to ask. And it is my first Hamilton Street meeting that I've been to. My only question is, we've seen in this town where we've had builders construct 55 or over developments, and after a couple of years, they've come crying to the township saying we can't fill these facilities, these buildings with 55 or older, and the town let them change it.
That's not valid. That's not true. No, that's just not true.
No, there were some state laws that made it so that towns had less control over the age restricted.
There was a law several years ago that when there was the housing issue, that if you had a development that had not been built yet and no units have been rented, that it could flip. If that's what you're talking about, but we did not. There has been no Canal Walk, any of the other ones that were built as 50 are still 55. The one you're talking about is Summerfields, that was zoned for senior citizen village. It had 200 units that were market. The rest of the units were supposed to be senior. When they had what you call the flip bill, that enabled, because none of those had been built or leased or rented, those units were able to be changed to market rate. Now, we took the position that we negotiated for about a year and a half with council's approval to get the bedroom counts down so we had more. But there's no place in this township that something was approved and built and subsequently has changed from 55 to others.
Okay, that partially answers my question. So the other part of it is, I just want to make sure that there's some kind of guarantee that this would not happen here, where these are designated, it sounds like, and again, I haven't heard everything. I see Bob waiting to respond, but I just want to make sure that these units which are designated, it sounds like that's the way it's being pushed.
Suggest that they can't legally be. Go ahead, manager.
No, I was just going to agree with you, Deputy Mayor, that no, you are asking a very valid question. There is no restriction upon these units to be student-only housing. This is a free market as far as the rental of these units. They are being targeted to a student population in many ways by the way that they're being built, the design of the building, the proximity to Rutgers University, the actual marketing is being, that's the concept behind this. But if you want to go rent an apartment there, Arnie, they're going to take your lease application just like anybody else's. I don't think you will be, but I think I know you.
It's not my concern about somebody like me who doesn't plan on having any more children.
No, and that's the point.
But my concern is that this
finish up, Arnie, please.
To more children that are going to be impacting on our school system. That's my concern.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, I'm looking around the room. Going once? Anybody at all would like, and besides, I'm sorry, Ms. Fudge, you're going to get one more, but,
This is just a follow-up
Okay.
question for clarification.
I'm sorry, but please, your name, we have to do your name and address again.
Geraldine Fudge, 35 Ray Street. For clarification regarding the congestion and the parking that's going to impact this new project. And my concern, my earlier statement, Mr. Vornlocker, was about traffic on Hamilton Street. Home Street is directly in the path of this project that's being built.
It's a little bit down the
That's
street.
where my serious concern is. So for clarification, are you saying that you have to do an impact study on
Yes.
traffic? Is that what you're
Absolutely.
saying?
If
Is that
this
gonna be-
concept were to come to an application to the planning board, one of their requirements for submittal to the planning board or the Board of Adjustment would be to have a full traffic impact assessment done to show what the impact this development would have on Hamilton Street and the surrounding streets. That's a requirement that we always have for any development of this nature.
Who is responsible for doing that? Is it developer?
The developer would be required to provide a traffic impact assessment done by a licensed engineer, and that would be then submitted as part of the application to the board.
Because that's a serious problem.
And that's always in any of these applications or for any commercial development, that's a requirement of the board for that type of
Okay,
development.
but I just want you to understand how serious it is because I experienced it, and Home Street is very, 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 very risky. No, and I don't want it to be like one of those incidents where we had with New Brunswick Road and Demont Lane, where we didn't do anything about the traffic light until there was a tragedy. So I don't want that to happen on Hamilton Street.
Thank you, Ms. Fudge. So, one last call for anybody from the audience and public who would like to speak, other than council and board members. Ms. Howard.
Jennifer Howard.
Closer to the mic, if you could repeat that.
Jennifer Howard, 88 Eugene Avenue. I just have a question regarding the parking, the limited spacing, the zip car, the rental bikes. Are they going to be stationed on Hamilton Street, or is it going to be off-site for their parking?
These are just opportunities. None of those details, obviously there's no application, there's no nothing. So these are opportunities that help kind of reduce the reliance on cars. So if and when a developer comes with an application that is, looking to do things like that, those type of details would have to be worked out then as part of the plan that would be submitted for approval.
Well, if they're stationed on the street, then that's going to eliminate some of the parking spaces. There'll be less parking. I experience it all the time when I go to my daughter's in New York. Sometimes I'm sitting there 35 minutes to get a parking spot.
Are you referring to City Bike, the City Bike program?
yes.
That does take up
Takes up
parking spot, if you use that at first. Sure.
For the bikes, ideally off-street, so they're not taking parking or things like that.
And the amount of parking spaces for the apartments, I'm a little concerned about that. My daughter's at Monmouth. It's 2 girls to an apartment. It's off-site, less than a mile from the school. But during the time when the beach is open or just prior to that, they have to alternate. One day she parks in the space, the next day the other girl parks. But in the meantime, she has to feed the meters. So is Hamilton Street going to become metered parking in this area, or is it going to remain free parking?
It's an option, but no.
The only analysis we've done is the requirement for
I think the parking should be increased, the spaces, where each apartment, if there's 2, I think there should be a little more space provided for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Sir? Sure, you just have to come give your name and address.
My name is Clayton Elsey, 75 Newport Avenue. Is this meeting just to discuss the parking, or can we bring up other issues that we're having in the
They're here to
I'm not
deal,
worried about that
right,
because I
but
don't
you
believe in
can,
the project. I say no
sir,
to
like I said, curious as how the Hamilton Street student housing will affect you. If there's any concerns, questions, comments about how you believe this will affect your life or about what we're doing, please, this is the opportunity.
I obviously it's a crock. I'll be honest, it's a crock, and somebody's probably getting some money for it. But That's not my concern. I have other concerns with services not being provided by the township. I have a property, Township tree, that's branches are breaking off in the yard, branches are breaking off in the road, and I get a point and a finger game between public service and the township. Public service says it's the township's responsibility. The township says it's public services responsibility. All I know is I need it addressed and I need it fixed. This has been a game going on for the last year and a half.
If you can give the address again, the manager could take note. I'm sure he'll look into it. You know the answer? Is there any other questions or concerns before the manager?
Because, you know, I'm paying taxes and I can't get your property taken care of.
Okay.
It's not mine, it's yours.
We hear you. Mr. Vornlocker, would you like to address that? No. Okay. I thought you said you were, I heard him say 75. Oh, okay. I thought you said you were familiar with the issue.
You know, that's the answer I've been getting for the last year and a half.
Well, unfortunately, I'm here and I don't know what the issue is because I just heard you bring it to my attention for the first time, and it's 75 Newport Avenue, and I'll look into it in the morning. I can't do any more.
Because you had the guy come out there, he looks at it, he goes, oh, yeah, it's no problem. He puts in a work order. I do a follow-up a month later. Oh, the work order's been canceled. I call back again. They put another work order in. Same thing. It's been canceled. So do you know what's going on in this township? You know what? I don't need a follow-up. I need something done about it.
What, sir?
You know? But what?
I would recommend that at least give the manager the opportunity to get back to you because
What?
I've heard.
Going through this for a year and a half, they had more than a chance to get it done.
I don't.
I get the same story every time.
So let me interject. So tomorrow's a council board meeting. So there, like I said, just besides this is open. So if somebody doesn't get back to you by tomorrow, and give you an answer, come back and say the same thing tomorrow. That's what I'm going to suggest. Because again, that way it can be addressed and it can be recorded on record twice. That's what I would suggest you do. And then if you have a problem, you can come see me in Geneva after this meeting and we'll talk offline with you about that.
The meeting?
Tomorrow 7 o'clock.
See you tomorrow at 7 o'clock.
All right.
Okay. Anyone else from the public looking to speak? Okay. Is there a motion to close the public portion of the meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Against? Abstain? Okay, public portion of the meeting's closed. Thank you for the input. So we want to move forward to where council and board members will have the opportunity to address.
I would suggest that if we have specific questions of our consultants, that we have those questions, because there may be more discussion that we can let the consultants, that they don't need to be involved in a lot of the issues that were brought up.
Okay, now I hear you, Mr. Dominic. So if the council and board is okay with that, and anybody who's leaving, I would stick around if you could, because the consultants and council members and Hamilton board members are here to respond to your questions and comments. So is there any additional information or answers that any of our experts would like to provide relevant to the questions that have come up?
Again, other than the analysis that my team has performed is not specific to promoting any project, and that's not to suggest that the project is good, not good. We take no position on the nature of the project itself. It's just that concurrent with performing this analysis, there is a project, and this provided an opportunity for our team to analyze that project. We have done so, and we've come up with recommendations strictly based on the number of parking spaces that should be required of a project that is being conceived. As the township manager said, an application has not even been made for this project. It's still very much in a conceptual stage. So based on that, and it could be any project, we happen to be this one, we looked at it and we examined other similar projects in the close proximity of this area to understand how those projects function with regard to parking and scale of building and number of units.
I would just like to point out, that obviously we had some recommendations on more innovative things that can be done to reduce parking demand, but the recommendations are really based on the data collected. And if you look at the utilization of the project that at 499 Hamilton and 507 Hamilton, you have a 1.17 per unit actual utilization and a 0.58 per bedroom. So these were counts that were done. 2 nights, late, middle of winter, obviously no holidays. We always look to do these types of counts when there's nothing that would take people away. So again, a lot of this is based on data that has been collected, not on theory or not on recommendations for reducing it. So that's the primary. If you want to get a little more innovative, then that's where and reduce the parking requirement more. That's when you maybe start implementing the parking demand management strategies that were kind of outlined. So.
And one last thing too, and this is in the literature, in the research that's done nationally by parking consultants, by planners, urban planners, is that today's young person, and I'm talking about who fit that kind of millennial age, but particularly from the 18 to even early 30s, all right? And this is true, and if you don't believe me, please research it, and if you find I'm wrong, tell me so. But that age group, in general, has a lower incidence of owning an automobile, driving an automobile. I have 4 kids. My oldest is 33, just turned 33. I have a 31-year-old daughter. Neither one of them own a vehicle, right? My oldest lives in Philadelphia. He hasn't owned a vehicle for the exception of 6 months. He takes Uber, he takes a cab, he rides his bike. Granted, there's transportation. My point is this, is that don't use the lens of what you knew from back when. Use the lens of today, because the lens of today with respect to who drives a car and how many cars they have is far different for the age group that we're talking about that is being targeted than what you remember 20, 30 years ago. It just is.
So, thank you. Was there anything else for our consultants? Okay, so now to move this along, what I want to do is I'm just going to summarize some of the complaints that I've heard over the last few years very quickly having to do with parking and traffic. I'll leave the rest for another time or later.
Deputy Mayor?
And I will go.
I just had a quick question about.
Okay, if you had a question, I was going to say, I'll have every council member and board member allowed to speak and respond, but if there's a specific question for the consultants, please, Councilwoman Pruitt.
Something you said, full disclosure, I am a millennial that you're talking about, so I think I come with some level of expertise. But you were talking about, people of my cohort, we don't own cars. I think it's also really important to put in the geographical context. Like, I born and raised in Somerset County. I lived in Philadelphia for a time. I went to school in North Carolina. In Philadelphia, while I had a car, it was easy to get around without having one. Like, Franklin Township in Somerset County, it's a car county, it's a car town. So I think a lot of what people are kind of pushing back on, at least specifically when it comes to parking, is the understanding that, yes, there are Ubers, there are Lyfts, there are bike shares, but the environment of this proposed, because it's proposed, it's hypothetical, nothing's been put to pen to paper, is that people are going to need to have a car because people need to have a car now, right? Regardless of who you are. And I think it's really important to put that in the context of that this is not Philadelphia. We don't have a subway, we don't have a bus system So I think when you're saying that, like, oh, you know, they don't drive cars, they have lifts. Yes, but I think it's specifically here. I don't know if that's as accurate, right? But you said that you've done stuff in New Brunswick. I get that, but just knowing what I know about where I grew up, we have cars.
Right. I think. Yeah.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and there's no doubt that geographical location, obviously access to mass transit, all that is critical. And again, I just, you know, and when we did these counts of, you know, we did not just look at student housing in New Brunswick because we understand it's a totally different environment. We looked at, you know, counts of Lower Hamilton, garden apartments where I would, you know, and the parking was full, but they, you know, so we've looked to address all those types of issues. We recognize that Hamilton Street is not downtown New Brunswick, it's not Hoboken, it's not that. So we're pretty comfortable in what we've recommended, you know, as far as, you know, the preliminary recommendation. And you know, I guess kind of the hope with this type of development is that it will become a little less reliant. If it is student-oriented, there are, you know, even in New Brunswick or even in, you know, in the Highland Park area, a lot of students that live in Highland Park are not auto-dependent. Some are, but not all are. And we would envision some students here would be auto-dependent, but, you know, a good portion would not be. So.
And I couch that with the fact that it is a hypothetical, right? So, but I just wanted to throw that out.
If I could just add too, that's why we're suggesting something to consider is the variance approach. It'll let you test something out without having to commit to it long term. Find out what works. Some of these strategies that have been suggested may work out just as we've said. Others may not. You don't know until you try it. So that was that. So I agree that this is, as I was saying, this isn't New Brunswick. This isn't Philadelphia. This is Hamilton Street in Somerset. It has its own unique issues, and you got to figure that out.
Thank you, Councilman Pruitt. So I'm just going to go over from script here. We promise you won't go off script. And a couple of the concerns that I've summarized over the actual years and especially the last few months, and then start with Mr. Kelly and go down here and have any board member and councilperson speak. The consultants, you're free to leave, you're free to stay. I do want to say that I am familiar with all these gentlemen's work. I consider them esteemed experts in the field. I appreciate their work, and I think you can't find better in the way of consultants, and I sincerely mean that. Of course, that being said, they're there dealing with the numbers and the research and statistics. We have to, in my personal opinion, deal first and foremost with the needs and the concerns and the long-term quality of life of the residents that are there. So this actually just becomes, well, not just, but it becomes a balancing act. I don't want to keep going on. I think people understand the gist of what I'm saying. I'm going to reference some parking and traffic issues here that I've been bullet pointed and that Councilman Wright and I have discussed, along with many residents and some other council people, and then I'll turn it over, like I say.
Hold on one second, Deputy Mayor.
Yes,
He's not up
Councilwoman
here, but
Wright.
Councilman Prasad, did you want to speak to those gentlemen over there, or?
Councilman, I'm sorry, Councilman Prasad, if you had a question directed towards consultants, and then we need to move into the council and board comments, please. You can use the one up there, Councilman Prasad.
And I think
Thank you,
should,
Councilman
you
Wright.
should allow anybody up on the dais or out in the audience to ask questions before you start summarizing all of that. No, while we still have the consultants here, there may be people here that have questions, so let's not dismiss them before we hear from everybody.
Hello?
From Hamilton
working?
Street.
Okay,
in
good.
the council.
No, I mean, it's recording, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Zulo, on the traffic part of it.
Closer to the microphone, Councilman.
And say your name, Councilman.
Okay. Councilman Prasad, and I've seen this whole area change over the last 44 years from what New Brunswick was and what it is today. And you based your traffic and parking requirements based on the experience of student housing, which is what this is targeted for, in New Brunswick and Highland Park, right? or statistics?
It was New Brunswick, Highland Park, some non-student housing in Somerset off of Route 27, some newly built multifamily. We had the parking ratios for what were approved along Hamilton Street. And then another sample was the Garden Apartments right at the base of kind of the border of Hamilton and Somerset on Hamilton Street, and then an actual project right adjacent to the proposed development site.
Could we get some of that underlying data just to look at it and get an idea, and for us to have a more comfort factor with it, so that we could get a feel for it?
Yep. Well, right now we've just produced a draft report, and we're waiting for feedback, and then we'll we will be submitting a kind of a full report.
Okay. So once we'd like to look at more of those numbers, because I'm curious to find out similar projects in New Brunswick, which are only a few not even a mile away, on Eastern Avenue and College Ave, and their requirements are probably different, and experience is different, but would probably apply a lot more to what we're doing, and like to know if it's directed at students. Let's see the experience that already exists within Rutgers and that Eastern Avenue and College Ave. There's huge high-rises that have gone up there.
Todd, could you bring the screen back? Could you bring the slide back that shows exactly what the councilman's asking? There you go. Yeah. Councilman, that's the data you're looking for. It's in the draft report, and it'll be submitted in the report to us once this report is completed after tonight's input and anything that needs to be adjusted for that purpose. Yeah. I think that's what you're looking for.
Right. And that would tell us exactly what the experience has been, so we can be more realistic in looking at our parking requirements.
Correct. And this is a unique site. It's a unique area. So we wanted to try to take as broad a look as we can at different types of properties, and that's what we tried to do. So.
Very close parallels, though, to being within a mile of the other developments there, directed specifically at students.
Correct.
So, and those are much higher high-rise buildings than
we didn't actually we did not do any data related to high-rise. We tried to look for similar sized or.
If you're going five stories.
About 4 or 5 stories.
Some of those are going up 10 stories, especially on Hamilton and College Ave. There's huge buildings that have gone up.
Mid-rise.
Right.
We specifically wanted to.
Well, I'd be curious to find out what those higher buildings are doing for parking also.
They're lower.
Those ones that are there, those.
Please use the microphone.
Right.
Just so it can be on tape.
Yeah, those high rises that are in the train station area, so they're not student housing there. The lower ones are more student.
No, I'm talking about right on Hamilton before you get to College Ave.
Yeah, there's one under construction there that is student.
And there's another one on Easton and Hamilton corner that's going up also. So, if you can find out what the experience is or requirements are.
Councilman Prasad?
Actually, the one on College and Hamilton has 0 parking.
Just because we have a lot of board member and council members, I'm sure that if it's not in here and it's able to be collected, you'll be able to get it. So while you're still here, I believe some council people and board members might have some questions for you. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask that you all stick around, and I'll make my comments at the end, so we can move this along, the long-awaited input or questions. Tim Kelly, past president of the Hamilton Board and present member, please.
Okay. My question is for Mr. Patterson. Working with the city of New Brunswick, you've handled many of these projects. A lot of them were in the 6th Ward. Basically, 2 or 3 houses were knocked down, 35-unit projects were put up. We had a lot of parking issues a while ago in the 6th Ward. How would you say, since those projects have been put up, is the parking situation in the 6th Ward? Would you say it's a lot better than it was 20 years ago, or it's...
Parking's always a struggle,
Yes.
but I think putting these projects up has improved the situation there. It has created more parking spaces off-site. These have been built under the buildings there. But there are distinctions between the parking rules for parking on the streets and so forth in New Brunswick and out here. So I wouldn't want to make a direct comparison between what we have in New Brunswick and to the current situation out here. You got to look at the unique situations that you have out here. Because when I was like, Hamilton Street in Somerset isn't New Brunswick on College Avenue, but you can provide parking that is on site, and you can provide mitigations to reduce the number of cars. And reducing that number of cars also helps with some of the comments that some of the people have had about the traffic impacts out here and pedestrian safety and so forth. I think that's a benefit that most people could agree with, that you want to try to bring less cars to the area, and so the area can function better.
Okay. I'd just like to add very quickly, I used to be the director of the New Brunswick Parking Authority. So I did all the parking, our agency issued all the permits for resident students, enforced it, highly familiar with the parking problems. And I can tell you what's changed in New Brunswick with the new type of development is it's a different type of student. The type of student that's historically lived in the 6th Ward in old houses are not the type of student or person that wants to live in this smaller, more controlled environment. And, we've worked on projects in New Brunswick, our firm, where they are geared towards, how can I put it? It is not a fraternity-like environment in these types of projects because they're small bedrooms, they're small units, it's not basements, it's not porches, it's not places to have a party, and they're not trying to jam. They make a conscious decision to live in these units based on kind of lifestyle and, that type of thing. So to kind of ask your question about what's changed, I would say that's a significant change in these types of projects. Just the fact that they're a little more controlled than a 2 or 3 or 4 family house, on Richardson Street that's trying to jam as much parking wherever they can.
Yes, I agree. I have a business in the 6th Ward, and parking used to be insane. And since these projects have come up, I've actually talked to Mr. Patterson, being worried, like, there's nowhere to park as it is, and somebody knocks down 2 houses and puts up 35 2-bedroom units. Where we're going to park? And what I've seen, you're right, the student is different. There are parking spots. There are less cars, less kids drive. And, that's what we're hoping for Hamilton Street, too. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight.
Mr. Giannato. You're good? Councilwoman Pruitt.
Just to clarify, is this just comments for them or just general comments?
Comments, either questions for them and also any comments or responses you want to give to any of the people that spoke earlier from the public.
Thank you. So one, I do want to thank you guys for coming out and obviously doing this work on behalf of the township that contracted you. Just out of curiosity, and this actually might be Mr. Dominic, you might not have the answer. So the projects that are already being built up now, are they the same group that did any of the studies, or is it?
No, because all of those projects were proposed and then reviewed by staff. Remember, this is a project that is a concept only.
No, I mean, like, I'm talking about.
Yeah, this group did not do any analysis of any of those projects. We passed an ordinance that allowed certain things. The Hamilton Board and the Planning Board know that we are having people come and ask to put student housing up. So the best thing to do to make sure that we get the correct development is have meetings like this and hire 3 of the best people you can hire. I mean, you heard their resumes. They not only are they nationally known, but they've done work in this area. So we have to rely upon them to give us information for you to either whether you pass an ordinance or we use it in the variance, and the board can use their report as a basis to grant variances. So no, they did not review any of the other projects.
Okay, yeah, that was the question because obviously I want to pivot. My one comment about the study was just what I said, like where Hamilton Street is, if this project even came into fruition, to me is a little bit different, right? But you guys have the pedigree. I respect that. And I guess as far as what you answered, I felt like a lot of the public discussion and the feedback was centered along the lines of the buildings that are already up, right? So I sensed a lot of frustration about the projects that are already going up and those concerns therein with the traffic and the safety. So I was just curious to see, you know, how that process went. And I'm not disputing that it didn't go the way it was, you know, supposed to. But, you know, as Councilwoman Francois did mention, you know, this was an opportunity for the community to come out and, you know, voice their opinions and their fears and their concerns. And, you know, they're all valid. I think we do all have a responsibility to make sure that we're not just looking at the future of Hamilton Street and that neighborhood, but we're also looking towards the current and the past and making sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that the quality of life, as Councilwoman Francois and Deputy Mayor Vassanella mentioned, the quality of life increases for all of the residents in that area, including all of Ward 4. And I think the fears and the frustration are real and they're tangible, and I felt that. And, you know, we really have a responsibility to address that. And, you know, I apologize that people felt like previous projects, they weren't, you know, looped in. But, you know, that's why I think this night was really important, so we can hear it. We can move forward with it. We can do better. And, no, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Pruitt. Councilwoman Francois.
I would say ditto to what she just said. But also, I want to ask a question. I want to just reiterate for this particular proposed project for 513 Hamilton Street, we said that there were going to be 172 units with 362 bedrooms. Is that correct? Were those the stats? Okay. And then you gave parking recommendations. One was 127, one was 215, and one was 172. Which one was your recommendation for parking spaces?
172 is what the developer, what was presented to us. 127, I'm sorry. Got numbers mixed. The next number, the 215, was what we recommended.
Okay.
And then the second number, and I apologize for not knowing.
172.
172 is what was it secure either in land that they own close to the project so that if there was a shortage, they would have that land available for excess parking.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification because a lot of stats were thrown out and I just wanted to make sure I understood it. That's all I have, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
And
John?
thank you for coming tonight.
Oh,
thank you.
John Accoy, board member of Hamilton.
Excuse me, Deputy Mayor.
Yes.
Ms. Francois.
Councilman Ryan.
You just said something, and it dovetailed to what I was going to ask, but I want to dig deeper if I can. You asked about the parking, and you said there was that a parking bank you were talking about something? The parking management? Could you just
parking management plan.
Okay.
Parking demand management plan.
And you gave that in, right? Or is that going to be in the report that you give us that we could?
That's the bicycles, that's the cars on site. All of those things are what he talked about earlier is what he's referring to, Councilman.
Done.
Yeah, all of that stuff.
Councilman Wright, did you have anything else? Okay. John. Board member of Hamilton.
I'm asking, and also as a reason. Part of my question is based on my experiences. Two of my kids went to school in Penn State College. The biggest challenge in the weeks when the kids are moving in and when the kids are moving out. When parents come in to bring the kids in and when parents come in to take the kids out. So my question is, how does that factor into your studies with regards to those 2 weeks of moving in and 2 weeks of moving out, and event periods like graduations and stuff like that, when parents move in large numbers?
I mean, I'll speak to that and say those are special events that can't be accounted for on a permanent basis with regard to parking. In other words, clearly understand what that happens here in New Brunswick, obviously, on move-in day and move-out day, happens at every university. Those are such events that you prepare with, additional police, you prepare with maybe directing people to where they can park temporarily, but you cannot plan for those what are temporary events on a permanent basis. It is cost prohibitive, and it's just not practical.
Thing I would add is that a lot of multifamily projects do have loading areas. They recognize, now not to the extent you're talking where there's a rush, 1 week in and 1 week out, but there is, some capacity for getting, moving vehicles off the main road and so that they can load apartments. But that's something I imagine if it's student-focused housing, they should consider.
Yeah, I was going to say, as part of the site plan review process, that's something you could look at during that, and your engineers and so forth could look and see where the appropriate loading areas would be and how they would handle that on those special days. Usually it's the move-in. The move-out usually isn't as bad because that usually happens towards the end of May, and yeah, it's over an extended period. Yeah, but the move-in can be a little bit. But these are small units, so people aren't coming here in moving vans. They're coming in mom and dad's car or a U-Haul.
But so my question follows up on that, the statement that you just made, and this has to do with the township. Is there a way that the township is being proactive with regards to this issue, since parking becomes major problem or major concern of the residents? While properties are going quickly in the area, does the township have a possibility of procuring and holding onto certain areas that in the event that because this parking issue is a moving target. Obviously, there are variances that we are not foreseeing right now. We don't know what happens 10, 15 years from now. But while these properties are going, will the township be able to procure and hold certain areas that if event becomes necessary, then the township can in fact build either parking decks or parking areas or whatever to alleviate these situations?
Well, I guess
it's for them. I think.
All right, I'll let you can answer.
A lot
that
of
first.
communities do exactly what you say. Again, because in some senses it makes sense to, the parking challenge is a challenge, and it's often a challenge for the right amount. It's also a challenge economic feasibility. So in some towns, they will acquire property. They'll build a kind of a centralized parking facility, be it lot or garage. And to the extent they allow the developer or any developer to deviate from the amount of parking that they think should be required, they do what's called a payment in lieu of parking, where the developer, let's say you give them a break of building 10 less spaces than the zoning requires. They pay the town a certain amount per space for every space waived, and that money goes to help fund. It can be a parking facility, it could be a mass transit operation, it could be any type of thing that helps traffic and parking. So your point is a very good one. It's a very good strategy for the municipality to play a role in helping to mitigate the parking demand and to ensure adequate funding to do that.
And we do already. There is an off-street parking fund. The developers pay into that fund when they provide less than what is required as far as off-street parking is concerned. There's a formula involved, and we're not going to belabor that tonight, but we do that already. And to answer your question about property. As I'm sure that you're aware, being that you're on the Hamilton Street Advisory Board, there is no vacant land to speak of along Hamilton Street or those blocks behind it for the township to acquire. There are large parcels of property that we've had discussions with the owners of as far as the redevelopment of those properties. There's 2 large shopping centers on Hamilton Street that have a sea of parking currently that goes vastly underutilized on a daily basis. Certainly there could be agreements if those properties were never developed, Nora Plaza and John's Plaza, if they never were redeveloped and they continued to operate in the fashion that they operate now, certainly if there was a need for off-street parking, the township could begin negotiations with those property owners to try to enter into lease agreements or the like. So all of those things have certainly been discussed and thought about at the staff level, but currently there's no plan on acquiring property because there simply is no property to acquire. Everything's developed. These developments that are being done along Hamilton Street, those developers are buying properties that are already improved upon, and they're bringing buildings down and creating vacant lots where previously they were improved upon, and they're building their buildings. That just shows the market value of the property on Hamilton Street, that it's worthwhile for them to do that. But as far as creating parking, we've talked about this many times. If there is a demand for parking that we identify in the future, then that's when we can begin to address those issues. Up to now, there hasn't been that demand. It doesn't exist. As these gentlemen have said, there is more than ample on-street parking available in the evening hours. And I drove Hamilton Street this afternoon at the peak of the business hours, and I could have parked at any location along Hamilton Street that I wanted to because there was more than ample parking during the day as well. And when if that comes a time where that doesn't exist, then certainly then we can look to utilize that parking fund that's been funded by the developers in the past to build municipal parking lots if the need arises.
Thank you.
Geneva, do you have any questions or comments? No? Mr. Guy? Both board members of Hamilton.
Pretty much my comments is that I applaud you guys for doing a study. It helps us out to actually look at the area in a different light, to actually expand it and look at it in comparison to what's going to happen in the future. Because we can complain about what happened in the past. We can talk about what's happening now, but regardless of what happens, we're still moving forward. And that's the thing that is, I think the change is what this community is just afraid of. And that's part of our job as far as Hamilton Street Board and the community to actually just get ahead of these issues. And we apologize for some of the stuff that you had to deal with personally with the residents asking your questions, but that's what, as being a consultant, I know that's what you guys probably deal with on a regular basis. So we apologize for that. So the question is for the community is just that, are they ready for change? I think one of the things that we witnessed here from the community itself was that a lot of stuff is just not getting communicated, which is kind of on our fault. And we had to take that on as far as council. We had to take it out on as far as Hamilton Street, and we had to take that on as a community that we're not talking about what we want to address. Because there's a lot of pain and a lot of hurt that is in the community. As you heard, we all got labeled is that when you're changing something, when you don't inform the person when you're changing, they come with a different perspective because they're not included in the conversation. And I think that we have to get ahead of the conversations because we've been behind for so long, and that area's been behind for so long. So now that things are happening and improving, that they don't feel like they're a part of the improvements. And I think that is something that we have to witness, and we have to say that we have to take accountability for that problem. And it's not just about who's right or wrong. It's about what are we doing to actually fix the problem. What are we going to do together? The young lady asked about resources, worried about the kids, worried about the old folks who are walking around the community. That is something that we have to deal with. We're changing it. So we have to get ahead of it. As one of your things you proposed in there, we propose some of the things that have been going on for a long time frame. Transportation solutions that are actually there. You have Zip cards, you have Uber services, you have other alternative means of transportation that's going to be accessible in that community now that was not there before. But the community's looking over that because it's some fact is it's a lot of pain that's going on. So that's a problem because the way it's been communicated and how it's been left for so long. Again, now that you're spending money, you're creating economic channels. What else is going to be done in that area to actually help improve? And with us as Hamilton Street Board, we've talked about it behind the scenes, and we're looking at those solutions. We're looking at resource centers. We're looking at improvement things. We're looking at clinics. We're looking at other things that actually bring in that area to actually improve that area because we know it's a need. But in order for a need to happen, we have to see that economics is actually there to actually improve it. So we're asking the community to actually come out and help and work with us as much as possible so that we can actually improve that area. Because it's not just about the developers that come in there, it's about the community residents. It's about what you want, what you desire, what you actually want to do in that area. And a lot of times we're not answering that question. So I fault us for not doing that. So I applaud the consultants for doing what they do, but again, we have to do a better job of communicating to the residents about what's going on. So that's my last comment.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. Sergeant?
No comment.
And smart man.
Yeah, but wait. I want everyone to look how sharp he looks.
Yes.
I mean, I'm telling you, he is sharp tonight.
Sergeant, I taught you well.
And I want to point out that the two community police officers have been here all night listening to in the audience, and I appreciate you being here and absorbing because I know you're dedicated to what's going on there and play a big part in its success. Thank you. And Sergeant, to you also.
And they're also part of the Hamilton Street Advisory Board.
Yep.
That's correct. Councilman Wright?
Well, why y'all looking at me like that?
Do you want us to come back to you?
Well, Carl, as long as you don't say, let's strap it in again, I'm going to be okay.
All right, strap it in, baby. Here we go. Just a couple questions, and I appreciate you coming in. The data sets that the report that you're going to write up, definitely need to look at that so I can come back to our zoning and planning boards with some other questions about parking. But you did the parking for this particular project. You just looked at it. I'm going to say it that way. But were they clued in on the other parking projects or no? They were just...
They were looking at a specific project to give us an idea of what the needs were for the specific project. Now, based on their expertise, they looked at other projects because that's what they do.
See, you are at a great disadvantage. That screen's too far away for you to see, and you're at a bad angle to see this one that I'm looking at right now. Exactly. Binoculars, I don't even know would have helped you with that one over there. But when you get that report, what you're going to see is that there was a full inventory done on not only the locations in New Brunswick and Highland Park, but also the ones at 863 Somerset Street, 727 Franklin Boulevard, 507 Hamilton Street, and 499 Hamilton Street, and 508, 516 Hamilton Street. Okay. So all of those locations, they did inventories. They gave the number of bedrooms, the number of parking spaces, what was occupied at their 11 o'clock survey, 10:30 to 11:30 p.m. when they did the surveys of locations to show how the impact of the utilization of their available off-street parking. So all of that stuff is there. You just you took your normal seat and now you couldn't see it. So that will be part of the report.
Next time I know to sit back.
Sit with me, and then you would have been able to see it.
And the only reason I brought that up is because I wanted to find out, and thanks to our township manager, all the projects that were coming up on Hamilton Street, and if you did if you analyzed all the buildings, what was your worst case scenario? If the parking that you were looking at that you said that the buildings all should have, and if it blew up and it didn't happen that way, for some, it just didn't work. And now I have more cars than what we projected I was going to have. Because I'm not going to go from the least, I want to go to the extreme. And if that case happens, where do I go? Because my residents are going to say, well, Carl, suppose instead of, I don't know, 1 car per bedroom or whatever, I got 3, I got 2, no matter what it is. And it's more than what you planned for. They say that we needed. Where do I go? Now, the township manager talked about parking permits or something of that nature, on resident parking and stuff like that. But I, too, drive around there at night. And looking at the cars on both sides of the street, behind the street, around the street, down the sides, my concern is if my residents come outside one day, and it's only going to take one day, for them to walk outside and get in their car, drive to work, and come back, and there's no parking because the guy that lives around the corner, down the block in that new apartment building we just built, took their parking space. Now I'm going to get a phone call, and they're going to ask me, well, why is this dude parking in front of my house? Where's my answer? Because it's going to be a moot point, and I know I'm going to go back to the township manager because that's the first thing I'm going to scream. I need parking permits. So
yeah, and all of that makes sense. The one closest to home for you is 863 Somerset Street, and it has 74 units. It has 155 bedrooms. It has 114 parking spaces, and when they did the survey, 83 of them were occupied, which meant that the balance of 114 to 83, so 17, 20, 31 were empty.
Okay.
So that one that did parking spaces by bedroom at 0.53 parking spaces by bedroom was the parking lot's underutilized.
Right.
Those are market apartments, not targeting students. So that's now. I mean, I don't know that there's any way that these gentlemen or anyone else can get their crystal ball out and tell you what's going to happen in 10 years. The truth is, Pine Grove Manor Cooperative Apartments, we talked about them before. Now they call them the Arbors, all right? They were built in the 1950s, and in the 1950s, they said that you don't need more than 1 parking space per apartment, all right? But by the 1980s and 1990s, we needed 3 per apartment, right? So now we're back to saying that in youthful living, we'll call it youthful living, you don't need 1 per apartment anymore. You don't even need 1. So I don't know what the answer is to that. And so what you have to do is hope that the experts are right, and you have to build out slowly and see what the impacts are as they grow. And it's kind of like,
is that what that variant?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what they're talking about is don't do it by ordinance, do it by variance, so you don't tie yourself into something that you wind up regretting. I think that's the point that the gentleman made, and I think that they're right. You don't want to go down that road where we change everything, and then we open that door. And that door stays open for as long as it takes to close it. And with zoning ordinances, it takes a little bit of time. And somebody could get a completed application. And we all know about, on council at least, you all know about completed applications and what that means. We went all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court about completed applications and what it means. So if it's, once it's complete, deemed complete, and that application is in, you change your ordinance afterwards, the old ordinance counts.
So we're all going to work on that.
But I also like the thought that you just put up, and we can do this at the staff level, is if you want to know what the cumulative effect of parking is as these buildings are built, we should look at the cumulative effect of it. Just don't take them as an island unto themselves, but you have to look at the cumulative effect along Hamilton Street for all. And I think that's the point you were trying to make, and it's a valid one.
And if you don't mind me adding, you have, I think, 2 projects that will go online well before.
That's right.
Whatever's proposed here will go online. So you can monitor and get additional real value data from those buildings before you probably have to make any decision on this parking.
And certainly not to diminish. I mean, we rely on experts all the time, and this is not a reflection on the gentleman who did all this, but certainly at an in-house level, we can go out and count cars in a parking lot, and really that's what it amounts to. Is what this gentleman is just saying to you is that we need to keep real-time accounts of what the demand is, and that'll give you an indication of the manner in which these units are being occupied, and by whom they are being occupied.
And I can tell you that when and if this project or any other project, they're going to do the parking counts for us. And we're going to demand that they do those parking counts because we're going to want to know, and they're going to use those numbers to justify what they want to build. That's part of the parking analysis and the traffic study that is done. I mean, that's what they do. You can go all the way up the block to, the Buster's, the CDC building. I mean, that's the perfect example of a building that was built and that it's maybe 1/3 the amount of parking. Any time of day you go there, there's 50 spaces that are open. And I'm not saying everyone's going to be, but that's what you look at. And we look at what's going to happen at the Recon, at those other two, and we'll have an idea. If tomorrow we got an application, that building isn't going to be built for 2 years. And it's not going to get heard for a month. We're going to have the data, and the developer is going to give us the data. Plus, we have expert data for right now that we can look to go forward. And that's good planning, Carl. And that's what the council and the planning board and the Hamilton board have demanded. We did good planning to get to this
I'm not going to argue with that. I'm just saying that as long as we don't have anything in stone as far as parking is concerned, and we're looking to go through that variant module, because I don't want to see us again, like you said, get into something we can't get out of. Somebody slips in something underneath, and then everyone comes crying on my door, and I'm like, well, listen, I didn't sleep on it, but this is what we did, and I don't want that to happen with my fellow councilmen.
And I'll give you a for instance, Carl. We granted a variance for the first building for Recon, and we took a shot in the dark. They gave us certain numbers that we relied upon. Now we have data from experts that we paid that our boards can use as a guideline in granting a variance. So we don't have to just trust the data that we get. We can use that. Plus, we have this report to base what the boards are going to review on.
Okay. Now, remember, I'm holding you to that now, right? Okay.
You always do.
All right, you know that's right. I think it was one more thing. Oh, and they're not with traffic, so I'm not even going to go with the traffic situation with that. I'm going to let that one die. As a funeral director, that was a good one, wasn't it? That's it, because the hour is almost at witching hour, so I'm going to let that one
Thank
go.
you, Councilman. Right, I'm sure we'll have further discussions on it. Councilman Will, and we can get to Councilman Chase in a minute. Did you? I'm sorry? Okay, Councilman Chase. Ted, the microphone's right here. Will has a microphone for you.
Theodore Chase, 159 Old Georgetown Road.
You're a member of this body. You
I,
don't have to do that.
as a longtime Rutgers professor, I'd just make a few observations about students, some of which go one way and some of which go the other way. One thing is there's not such a clear line between students and non-students, because there'll be undergraduates, which is what you've been talking about. There will be graduate students. There will be postdoctoral fellows. There will be interns at Robert Wood Johnson Hospital. I think the only thing they'd have in common is that generally they'd be unmarried. Because I would think that married couples would go for a rather different sort of apartment. The graduate, as you get on up, more of them in age, the graduate students and postdocs, more of them are married, but you also have graduate students and postdocs coming from other countries who are particularly likely to use this type of housing. Sometimes we even have people coming short-term, 3 months, 6 months, looking for housing. And this may, depending on what the landlords want in the way of length of lease, this may or may not be appropriate. On the other hand, this is a little bit farther from the downtown Rutgers campus that's along College Avenue. But you have to remember that there's also the Bush campus, the Livingston campus, the Cook campus. And the present student body mostly use the Rutgers buses to go among these campuses. And somebody living in these apartments might, if they were primarily studying on the old Queens campus, as we call it, they might be willing to walk to campus, but to walk and then take a bus might just make them take too long. So I think they would, just on this angle, I think you'd get a slightly higher car count than you would in the 6th Ward of New Brunswick, which is that much closer to the campus. The single biggest thing that could alleviate any parking problem would be to have the Rutgers bus system extend up as far as this complex. And it conceivably, the owners of the project could subsidize the Rutgers bus system a little bit to come up to this apartment. That's probably a simpler way of dealing with it than the things that you've mentioned, which particularly off-site parking, I think might be a relatively small contribution to the total. Because one point here is this project is much bigger than any of the ones cited in your table. Even half the project.
Councilman Chase, your mic is cut out, and I know what you're saying is very important, so
Yeah.
could we please? Okay, go ahead. You may want to just repeat your last.
I don't know how far back to go. Well,
just 30 seconds.
Start over again.
Well, I said certainly the simplest thing to ensure that there is not a parking problem from a student-oriented housing is to have the Rutgers bus system extend up as far as these apartments, and perhaps the owners of the development could subsidize the Rutgers bus system slightly to do this. That's speculation. One observation I'd make, perhaps more for the benefit of the audience, you've talked about using variances. I think a variance granted to this project or to any specific project, once they get the variance, they can hold to that and they develop to that. It's only the next project and the next project that it makes a difference to. And I'm sure that those people who have come and expressed concerns, very largely they're concerned about the next project and the next project and the completely changing the nature of the neighborhood. But I will say that one of the major objectives here of developing Hamilton Street is to offer more choices to the neighborhood and, in fact, more jobs to the neighborhood. If there are more stores, more restaurants that are businesses serving the students and the people in the other apartments, they're also serving the people of the neighborhood and providing jobs for the neighborhood. And that is ultimately the major objective of redeveloping Hamilton Street. And from time to time, I hear worries about safety on Hamilton Street. I live far away and I'm not on Hamilton Street at night, so I can't address this, but certainly having more people such as students on the street at night will increase the safety of Hamilton Street at night. Yeah, I think the only other thing I'll just repeat is the fact that what has been proposed is much, much larger than most of what you cite. Only one of them is even half the size. I don't know whether this makes any difference to your analysis, but I do ask the question whether it makes any difference to your analysis. Okay, did you hear that?
Yes, thank you. Did you want to answer that before we go to the last few people?
Just very quickly, you know, we can probably get data on bigger projects, but my guess would be that they would even have a lower parking ratio than the other student housing that we've identified. If you look very quickly, the student housing in New Brunswick has a utilization of 0.61 per unit, 0.35 per bedroom. We're recommending about twice of that. So,
yeah.
But
I
that might
think
be.
You are proposing a considerable margin for error on that.
And we
is
can maybe grab
encouraging.
another data point related to that.
I just wanted to add, for those who are familiar with the report that we earlier presented, the market study, and Vince will recall, one of the recommendations that we have in that report is for a shuttle service that would actually circulate through what we're now calling the Franklin Business Park, would make its way onto Hamilton Street, and then ultimately make its way into downtown New Brunswick to the train station, and obviously provide greater access to the Rutgers buses. That is a recommendation that we placed in the earlier report, which has kind of gotten lost here, and you know, rightly so, because people don't remember what was in that report. But if something like that were to be instituted, that is a huge parking management mitigation measure, right? If you've got a system like that, I mean, it is no different than having a Rutgers bus. And actually, after I graduated Rutgers, I lived in the apartments right on the edge of town, and I would walk to the bus and take the bus to work. And this was my boss way back in the day. And I would take the bus to work. And so that same thing can happen by having a shuttle bus that actually also accomplishes this. I've heard a lot about economic development and job creation and creating ratables. That same circulator doesn't just bring people who live there, it also brings people who live outside the community into Hamilton Street who patronize businesses. So you want to keep a broader perspective on how this all works. It's not just about getting the kids who might live at this building back and forth. If you've got the right type of transportation measures in place, it benefits a whole bunch of folks, not least of which are those who work and own businesses along Hamilton Street.
I think it's important that we let Bob speak on this because we've had prior conversations about the Rutgers and the public transit, so Bob can speak on that.
Thank you, Mr. Vornlocker.
Now, you know what? It's the other one causes the interference, so I turned it off. Just to address some of the concerns that Councilman Chase brought up, I guess it's about 3 years ago now that we met with representatives of Rutgers University, New Jersey Transit, and Somerset County Transportation about providing mass transit opportunities along Hamilton Street, specifically with what we envisioned, because there was even discussion back then as to how Hamilton Street might develop and how it might become attractive to Rutgers University students, and as the councilman said, both undergraduate and postgraduate students. What Rutgers University Transportation told us at the time was there's a Lewis Street loop that comes off of Hamilton Street. That's where the bus turns around, on Lewis Street, which is just a short distance into New Brunswick on Hamilton Street, and that they would be more than willing to extend that bus route if we saw the demand from Rutgers students on Hamilton Street. So obviously, as these developments progress, we'll once again revisit Rutgers University Transportation and show them, and I don't know that we'll have to show them, because I'm sure that their own students will show them that they'll be looking for transportation to Bush, to Cook, to Douglas, and to all the campuses, which, like I said, is only less than half a mile away from this location that we're talking about tonight, 513 Hamilton Street. Lewis Street is just over the border into New Brunswick. So that those discussions have already been had once. There was no demand for it then, so Rutgers said no. Just like there was no demand for Somerset County. Somerset County created shuttle stops on Hamilton Street, and they went vastly underutilized. New Jersey Transit said the same thing, and unless we can show demand. Now, certainly, with suburban transit right on Somerset Street, not far away, if we can show the demand for mass transit to New York City or other locations that New Jersey Transit, Princeton, that they service, then we can talk again about bus stops on Hamilton Street. But Rutgers is the most viable, and if there's an influx of Rutgers students, certainly Rutgers will want to provide them transportation by their own bus service. So that was discussed in the past.
Councilman Will.
So, good evening. Thank you. I'm Councilman Galtieri. Thank you so much for presenting this. You hit close to home a little bit because for 4 years I was in Philadelphia at a university right in the neighborhood. So the information makes sense to me. So that's something I keep in the mind also because we as students did take up some of the neighborhood parking and we were in the residential. So this definitely hits home more. I guess one of the questions I would just pose is I see that you did studies on different housing developments around here. Have you looked outside of New Jersey to colleges and universities that are part of the neighborhoods that maybe, one housing building of 300 units isn't going to be, it isn't the same as having a full university or college right there. But have you looked at others that the neighborhoods have revitalized around the college at all? Would be the first thing I would ask.
Well, we for this analysis, we really didn't. I think what we did is we looked at other models related to parking demand management. So we did not do any data collection. Obviously, understanding that projects like that exist, it still requires you to go out and maybe count the cars. So again, our data related to surveying what the actual utilization has been local, but we looked at strategies that were employed by other student housing not on campus, i.e. one of the Uber subsidy is a program at a project in California. That's an off-campus project where they do give a subsidy to their residents to take an Uber, Lyft, that type of thing.
Okay, and I do want to highlight that I guess Councilwoman Pruitt and I are the closest to getting out of college, and also you're right, it has changed significantly because Uber wasn't around for us. So, and that was being in a city that we had one subway line access to us, but buses. But yes, it's changed that you don't need the car as much, and even I see with our interns at work at that. So, but I do want to I guess to the public's concerns, I want to reassure that some of us were in schools that were similar to this. So we are taking I do remember sadly, I was not one of the people messing around with the neighborhood, but that we were part of the neighborhood and we had to interact with the community. So we have to take that into account as we go forward with this plan. So thank you again for the information tonight. It was helpful. I hope the residents found it useful, but that's all I have. So Councilman Onujaka.
Councilman Onujaka, please.
Yes, thank you. To me, I feel this building will be very, very helpful. One, it will accommodate a large number of students, but it has its own challenges too, like security, rowdiness. Students got to be students. Are we prepared to deal with such challenges?
Councilman, I'll just reiterate that
security.
Those issues that you're raising, which are all good issues,
yes,
are not issues that are part of our charge. Okay. Those would be issues that would get covered once there is a formal application, when there is a formal application, okay, and at that point that project is open to those discussions and those issues. We would have, no comment on any of those things, and again, not to say one way or another. That's not our charge.
Okay, because what I want us to bear that in mind, because it will come from the design of the environment and the design of the house to put all those factors in place.
Right, and once that building, if in fact it goes forward and becomes a planning board application, at that point, it then becomes subject to those types of issues and questions.
Thank you. I like the building.
Thank you, Councilman. Manager, did you have any comments from myself and the mayor? We'd like to wrap it up.
So just to, and I don't want to talk long, but I just want to kind of actually go back to a conversation that you and I had on Friday. No, it's all good. At least I think it's all good. So the deputy mayor and I had an opportunity to speak for an extended period of time on Friday afternoon about this and about the neighborhood that surrounds this area. More importantly, I think, is that. And that seems to be some of the concerns that were voiced tonight. I think that, and all of council, more so than Hamilton Street Advisory Board, but all of council should really think about what the deputy mayor and I talked about on Friday, and that's that we can't lose sight of the neighborhoods that surround Hamilton Street as we focus all of our attention on Hamilton Street. Some of the things I did, so I told you I took a ride down Hamilton Street today, and I just to get it all fresh in my head before tonight, and I drove around the surrounding neighborhoods. I didn't just stick to Hamilton Street. And then I went to the Public Works garage and met with our Public Works manager, who happens to be our capital projects engineer. And I said, I think that we need to do some things here. And the first step in the process is what the deputy mayor and I talked about, is we need to kind of do a full analysis of the streetscape and the infrastructure in the neighborhoods that back up Hamilton Street. Because as we all talk about off-street parking and all the other things, we have streets without curbing, streets without sidewalks. I hear pedestrian safety, and we want to make this walkable. We want to do all of those things. Well, we can't focus all of our attention on Hamilton Street. We need to focus our attention on everything that backs up Hamilton Street on both sides of it as well. And I think that I'm going to start that process along with the deputy mayor now, tonight. And my thought was that we would talk about this tonight so that as we move forward, I can utilize things like summer engineering interns and employees to go out and do a street inventory of all of those areas and document drainage and sidewalks and curbing and condition and all of those other things, because all of that backs up Hamilton Street supports Hamilton Street. It supports it for things like parking too. I mean, it does play into the discussion that we're having tonight, and those neighborhoods behind Hamilton Street support Hamilton Street just as much as what we build on Hamilton Street. So I think that we'll begin to move that process forward in conjunction with all of these discussions that we have here tonight on possible projects that may or may not come to fruition. But the existing neighborhoods can't be left behind, and I think that we heard that tonight, and I kind of support the deputy mayor's efforts here in trying to get that accomplished here. So that's really all I have to add to it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I feel like things are starting to come full circle. I am just going to stick to something I already wrote, unless the mayor would like to go first, closing comments from myself and him, because I know it's getting late. But real quick, I agree that the parking is not a big issue right now, but I think it's more about, as we heard tonight, the concerns of what the results of what's been built but not occupied yet, and then of course projects like the one we're talking about tonight and others that are going to come down the pipeline. So real quick, I'm just going to read down the list of highlights and then have the mayor make closing remarks. So under parking, many people feel like going forward we will not have enough parking for the increased amount of new residents and business patrons. Part of the reason retail and other businesses are not flocking to the area is that there is no substantial parking plan to add parking to the area yet. Although many of the new residents are likely to be students, and percentage-wise they do not have as many cars as non-student residents, these off-campus students have families, friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, gatherings, etc., which will likely draw many more vehicles in need of parking than just those of the residents. We are likely to see a huge increase in Amazon-type delivery vehicles and to what may be several hundred to a couple of thousand new housing units in Hamilton. We also see a huge increase in Uber or taxi-type transport vehicles in the area. Hamilton Street is one lane in each direction, and there are no specific plans yet to deal with the designated delivery zones and passenger pickup areas that can help reduce the amount of people double parking or illegal parking in the area. As more businesses move into the area, there will also be a need for employees to have parking spots, which was not covered in depth tonight. If any of the shopping centers that are currently have an abundance of parking, like Nora Plaza, Johns Plaza, et cetera, decide to maximize their current build-out potential of their properties going up and out to the maximum, we may lose several of the existing parking spots and add several hundred more housing units. Traffic. I'm almost done. Although traffic often flows fairly well on Hamilton Street now, with what is being constructed and will be constructed going forward, at certain times of the day and evening, the amount of traffic will greatly increase and bring traffic backups and safety issues. Some of the intersections that do not have traffic signals can be difficult to make turns from the side streets onto Hamilton. Presently, Presently, some of the cut-through streets from Hamilton Street to 27 and some others have serious issues with vehicles driving way over the speed limit, and this problem may get worse going forward with the build-out. Pedestrians and bike traffic in certain areas will greatly increase, and that the streetscape, setbacks, intersections, etc., need to be designed and built to safely accommodate this increase. It is a real possibility that we may see additional bus stops, including Rutgers campus buses, and that there is no specific plan yet as to how to incorporate this into the Hamilton Street build-out, which is one lane in each direction. Hamilton may lose several more existing street parking spots that are there presently to accommodate new bus stops. Several streets in the area have been repaved recently. This gets what the manager was saying, and several others are scheduled to be repaved in the near future. The previous and upcoming repaving projects will not solve the chronic drainage issues, right-of-way issues, sidewalks, etc., scattered around parts of the adjoining neighborhoods, especially some pockets between Hamilton and 27. Several residents have asked that the decorative street lighting and decorative streetscape that is already on Hamilton or may be put there going forward is also put on the first block or two going down the side streets from Hamilton Street to improve the quality of life and the aesthetics. There is no public green space of any kind yet along Hamilton Street. There is only one neighborhood park on the southeast end of the district, named Williams, with no planned recreation or park space yet to better accommodate existing residents and the many new residents coming soon, especially on the northwestern half of the district where this project is proposed. Last two. Several people do not want tall, wide, box-style apartment buildings closely abutting their residence, especially that of 5 stories. A desire for more pleasing aesthetics around the back and sides of buildings, wider setbacks and more green buffers, trees, landscaping, etc., is desired by many people. People are concerned that the focus of creating a vibrant, new, expanded business district that provides products, services, eateries, jobs, etc., up and down Hamilton Street for existing and new residents is shifted to an effort to pack in as many college students and large high-rent residential-only buildings. Realizing government most often does not have any say in who businesses hire, people are hoping that there will be some specific job opportunities for local residents as a result of the Hamilton Street District revitalization efforts. That's all I have. And I just want to say that I'm not mentioning these things, as I'm sure most of the people in the public and up here, to not to suggest we don't want this particular project or any other projects coming along. It's here because, like it was brought out tonight, that I think we're a little bit of a victim of our own success. We have this build out, we have some issues, we got to catch up to speed with dealing with these issues, get ahead of the curve, and hopefully we'll have a wonderful build out of Hamilton that will benefit not just the developers, which need to make money, absolutely, but the residents and their future quality of life. That's all I have. I appreciate everybody's time. I want to thank the mayor for, or maybe I shouldn't thank him, but I want to thank him seriously for allowing me to chair the meeting, because he knows how dedicated not just myself, but the other council members up here that are on the Hamilton board are, and the Hamilton board members, of course. I thank Mr. Vorlacher and Vince, Mr. Dominic, who's the executive director, because now I feel like I have a lot of work to delve into. And thanks again to our experts. And I'd love if the mayor had any last comments or please.
Thank you. So the structure of this meeting was set up because it was going to be a Hamilton Street meeting, a special one to hear the public's views. Mr. Wright indicated that all of council should attend, and then by law, then we had to publicly notice it. And I've got to say, even though we have a full council meeting tomorrow, every council member is here and has been here for the entire meeting. So I thank them. I thank, of course, the citizens for coming and telling us their views, that we can't do this without you. I would thank the consultants, except I'm paying them, so, you know, that's thanks enough. And I, of course, thank the members of the board. I think this is done in a very open manner. I take exception to the comment that, you know, how come we're just hearing about this? You're just hearing about this because it's in concept now. I mean, this is incredibly early on to be hearing about it. I mean, this is a meeting about parking, but we listened to meetings about building facades, public safety, pedestrian safety, etc. Hamilton Street, I've only been here for 20 years, but I'm told by people like Mr. Vassanella, Mr. Cano, have grown up here their whole life, that there's been little change for 4 decades in Hamilton Street. Well, as the future rolls in, there's going to be change. And we can do nothing, and then there will be change, and that change will be negative. It's not going to stay the same. And people often say, we're not doing anything along Hamilton Street in the 4th and 5th wards to improve things. There isn't enough money in that the council has control of to do the things that people want to do. I mean, if we doubled your taxes and all of that double went to council, it wouldn't be enough money to do these kinds of things. I mean, what is the cost of this project?
80, 90 million?
Right. We have a $60 million budget. So 80, 90 million.
You raised $35 million by taxes. $35 million is raised through taxes. The rest
Right.
is through other revenue.
So, and capitalism has gotten a bit of a bad name in the last several months, but capitalism is the way I see to do it. And I'm not saying this project is the right project, and I'm not saying your concerns aren't the right concern. Your concerns are the right concerns because you are the citizens who live there, and we need to hear those concerns. But we have to do something if we are going to improve this area, and this is one suggestion, to bring in students. We're not building this, we are not building anything. This project's idea is not so we can fit the needs of students. This is to bring student money into town. And Mr. Tibbs has come up many times and said he wants jobs for his people, jobs, his words. Well, bring in money and then we can create jobs. And as Mr. Vornlocker talked about, and Mr. Vassanella, thank you for bringing up, we don't want to build this nice wall on one block either side of Hamilton and then ignore everything on the other side of that block. We have to fill in, we have to work on that infrastructure, but we need the money to do that, and these kinds of projects can provide those monies. And as we bring in more people and we need to provide services, and there's an economic benefit to others provide services, things Mr. Guy has come up with, you know, maybe we get more healthcare facilities, maybe we get a bank in the area. There had been banks in the area, they moved out. Maybe this will be a reason for banks to move in. All of those things can follow. So we have to take baby steps. I'm now quoting Mr. Dominic, because that's what we're doing. We're doing some very small steps, little at a time, so that if we make an error, there's no major harm done. The variance method, excellent idea to do that, because then you can change it as you go. But we have to do something. Please continue to guide us in how we do that. I do not want to gentrify, but I want to bring more money into the area, create more jobs in the area so that the people of that area benefit. They have more resources, they have more jobs, and we can grow. You know, it's one, you know, look at how much Councilman Wright had to fight to get those sidewalks. Sidewalks! Well, that was $750,000 a couple of times, 3 times, whatever. You start building all this, you have to bring in money because, you know, we've got some police officers here.
Don't throw those sidewalks in there. Don't do that. Don't do that because you know that's wrong.
No,
don't do that.
Carl, I have
Mayor
the floor.
has the floor.
And what I'm talking about, Carl, is it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to get sidewalks in, and they're relatively cheap compared to what these kinds of projects are. And that was a hard lift. And those sidewalks, you build them once. And yes, Carl, I'm thanking you. You build the sidewalks once, and then you don't have to put more money in. But you build these kinds of infrastructures and you bring people in, and we need more police. And those police, they want to get paid every couple of weeks. That's a thing they have. And so that's an ongoing cost. So in order to do that, we need to build things, or it's just not going to happen. But I thank the public because without their guidance, you know, stand behind her and guide her. Stand beside her and guide her from God Bless America. Stand beside her and guide her. Without your guidance, we'll do it wrong. But with your guidance, I hope we can do it right. These kinds of projects are what we need to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think we're coming towards the close of the council part of the meeting, and I don't know if there's a couple items on the Hamilton agenda still left. I don't know if they're necessary to do tonight. I'll leave that up to discretion of our executive director.
That is up to the chairman. If the chairman wants to kick to the next meeting, and we can talk about having a meeting next month, I leave that up to the chairman to decide.
I absolutely feel that we can push him off to our
Okay.
next
We'll
Okay.
So when the meeting is adjourned by council, it'll also be adjourned for the Hamilton Street Board also then, according to the chairman.
Okay. So unless there's any really important issue, I'm going to ask for a motion to close
So moved.
So moved. Everybody in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye. Against? Abstain. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.